There are some sounds that crack the world in half. The sound of a child learning not to scream is one of them. Brielle heard it through the stone walls of the Alpha King's fortress on a night when the moon hid its face in shame. Not a cry. Not a whimper. Just the soft, suffocated silence of a 6-year-old boy who had discovered that pain was easier to survive if you swallowed it whole. If you made yourself small. If you stopped hoping someone would come. She had pushed open that door knowing it could cost her life. Knowing that maids did not interfere in the private chambers of royalty. Knowing that what happened between an alpha's mate and his heir was sacred territory, forbidden ground, the kind of business that got curious servants thrown into dungeons and forgotten. But when she saw him, little Torin, the future king, kneeling on cold stone with his hands folded and his back straight and his eyes empty, she understood with horrifying clarity that some rules were meant to be shattered. Because standing over him, wooden rod still in her elegant hand, was Vivian. The Luna. The blessed fated maid of the most powerful alpha in 5 territories. The woman whose beauty was worshipped and whose grace was envied and whose cruelty was hidden behind a smile that could make grown wolves weep with devotion. She was not angry. That was the part that turned Brielle's blood to ice. Vivian was calm, controlled, almost serene. She was not correcting the boy. She was enjoying him. Every calculated strike. Every whispered insult too quiet for anyone else to hear. Every moment she forced him to kneel and thank her for teaching him strength. This was not discipline. This was not a stepmother's strict hand or a ruler's heavy burden. This was wickedness dressed in silk and perfume. And the worst part, the part that made Brielle's wolf howl in anguish beneath her skin, was that Torin never fought back. Never screamed for help. Never ran to find his father. Because somewhere along the way, in the months since his real mother had died, he had learned the most dangerous lesson a child could learn. That no one was coming to save him. That the pain was his to carry alone. That love and violence could wear the same face. Brielle had done the unthinkable then. She had stepped between them. Had met the Luna's cold, beautiful eyes. Had felt the weight of that murderous smile. You forget yourself, maid. But Brielle had not moved. Could not move. Because Torin's small hand had gripped the fabric of her skirt with desperate, trembling fingers. Because his silver eyes, so much like his father's, had looked up at her with something she recognized. The last fragile ember of hope before it died completely. So she had stayed. And Vivian had left. But not before promising, in a voice like poisoned honey, that this moment of defiance would be repaid in blood. Now Brielle knelt beside the boy in the flickering torchlight, her hands shaking as she pressed a damp cloth to the split in his bottom lip. The Alpha King was supposed to be gone for 3 more days. The border skirmishes were meant to keep him occupied. That was what gave Vivian her freedom. Her privacy. Her uninterrupted hours with the child she despised. But the air had changed. Brielle felt it before she heard it, that sudden electric shift that made every wolf in the fortress go still. The kind of presence that did not announce itself because it did not need to. The kind of power that made torches bow and shadows retreat. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Slow. Inevitable. Each one a countdown to disaster. No, he was not supposed to be here. Not tonight. The Alpha Wolf King had come home early. Brielle's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced through 1,000 terrible possibilities. If Silas found her here, alone in his private chambers with his son, Vivian would twist it into treason. Into an attempted kidnapping. Into anything that justified rage and execution. But if she ran now, Torin would be alone when his father demanded answers. The boy would try to explain. Would stumble over his words. Would reveal everything in his desperate need to please, to be good, to be worthy of the love he had been systematically taught he did not deserve. And Vivian would make certain he paid for it. The footsteps grew closer. Louder. The scent of cedar and smoke and mountain storms filled the air. Brielle's hands stilled on Torin's face. She met his wide, terrified eyes. Stay quiet, she whispered. No matter what you hear. Do not move. The boy nodded. Obedient even in fear. She stood on trembling legs, every instinct screaming at her to submit, to kneel, to beg forgiveness before the Alpha even asked questions. But fury rose in her chest alongside the terror. Fury that this had been allowed to happen. That no one had seen. That no one had stopped it. That she, a nameless maid with no rank and no power, was the only one who had dared to look. Brielle stepped into the corridor and pulled the door closed behind her with trembling fingers. And came face to face with death itself. Silas stood 3 paces away, and the sight of him stole the air from her lungs. He was broader than memory served, taller, carved from shadow and violence, and the kind of authority that did not need to raise its voice to make grown alphas kneel. His dark hair was wet from rain, droplets sliding down the harsh angles of his face. His eyes, silver and cold and utterly merciless, locked onto her with predatory focus. This was the wolf who had united the northern packs through conquest and blood. Who had never lost a challenge. Who had never been denied. And she was about to give him an order. Brielle's heart slammed against her ribs. Her wolf pressed against her bones, begging her to submit, to lower her eyes, to remember what happened to those who defied kings. But behind that door was a little boy with bruises he had learned to hide and pain he had learned to swallow and a silence that should never live in a child's throat. So she stepped directly into the Alpha King's path. And she whispered the words that should have killed her. "My king, stay silent." The world held its breath. Silas did not move, did not blink. But something shifted in the air between them, something dangerous and crackling and inevitable. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. She watched his wolf rise to the surface, watched his eyes begin to glow with that eerie silver light that preceded violence. He could snap her neck with one hand, could have her dragged away before she drew another breath, could end her for this insolence, this impossible audacity. But then his gaze moved past her, to the closed door, to the chamber where his son waited. And she knew the exact moment he scented it. Blood. Fear. The particular sharp tang of a child's terror. His expression did not change, but every muscle in his body went rigid. The temperature in the corridor dropped 10 degrees. When his eyes returned to hers, they held something that made her knees weak. Not anger. Understanding. The worst kind of understanding. The kind that meant everything he thought he knew was about to shatter. His voice, when it came, was barely above a growl. Move. It was not a request. It was the voice of a king who had never been denied. The voice of an alpha whose word was law. But Brielle saw what he did not yet understand. If he stormed through that door now, demanding answers, Torin would panic. Would try to explain. Would blame himself the way abused children always did. So she held her ground, held his gaze even though it felt like standing in front of an avalanche, and breathed one word. Please. Something flickered across Silas's face. Confusion. Shock. No one said please to kings. No one asked. They begged. They obeyed. They submitted. But this maid, this trembling, terrified maid who smelled of fear and desperation and something else, something fierce and protective that his wolf recognized even if his mind did not, was not begging. She was bargaining, with her life as collateral. For his son. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Brielle saw it in his eyes. Saw the moment the pieces began to fall into place. She stepped aside. Silas moved past her in one fluid motion and pushed open the door. The scene inside was carefully arranged. Torin sat on the edge of his bed, hands folded, back straight, looking every inch the proper young heir. But Silas was not looking at his son's posture. He was looking at the bruise blooming across the boy's cheek. At the split lip. At the way Torin flinched, just slightly, just barely, when his father's shadow fell across him. At the way the child's hands trembled before he forced them still. The Alpha Wolf King, terror of 5 territories, conqueror of the northern reaches, the wolf whose name made enemies surrender before battle even began, stood frozen in the doorway of his own son's chamber. And for the first time in his reign, his hands shook. Not with rage. With the horrifying, gut-wrenching realization that the monster he needed to fight lived under his own roof, wore his mark, shared his bed, the bond that fate itself had sworn would complete him. Behind him, Brielle watched the truth carve itself into his face, watched the exact moment a king's world cracked in half. And she knew, with terrible certainty, that nothing in this fortress would ever be the same. If you want to know what happens when an Alpha King discovers the one person he trusted most is the one who broke his son. If you want to know what a father does when love and rage and fate collide. If you want to know why a maid would risk everything for a child that is not hers, then stay with me, because this is where the real story begins. And before it ends, this kingdom will burn. And please subscribe to the channel, it means a lot. Silence could be a scream if it was loud enough. The silence in that chamber was deafening. Silas stood in the doorway, every muscle locked, every breath controlled, his wolf clawing at his insides with a violence that threatened to split him open from the inside out. He had walked battlefields soaked in blood, had stood over the bodies of wolves who had challenged his reign, had made decisions that sent hundreds to their deaths without losing a single night of sleep. But nothing in his brutal, blood-soaked life had prepared him for this moment, for the sight of his son flinching at his presence. Torin sat perfectly still on the bed, his small frame rigid with the kind of tension that did not belong in a child's body. His hands were folded in his lap with mechanical precision. His back was straight. His chin was level. Everything about his posture screamed discipline, control, obedience. Everything except his eyes. Those silver eyes, a mirror of Silas's own, held something that made the Alpha's chest constrict with a pain sharper than any blade. Fear. Not the healthy wariness a pup should have of disappointing his father. Not the nervous energy of a child caught misbehaving. This was the fear of prey. The fear of something that had learned through repetition that pain was inevitable, that safety was an illusion, that the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones you needed protection from. Silas's wolf snarled, a vicious sound that echoed only in his mind. Every instinct demanded he shift, hunt, destroy whatever had put that look in his son's eyes. But he forced himself to remain still, forced himself to breathe, forced himself to look at what he had been too blind to see. The bruise on Torin's cheek was fresh, the skin swollen and discolored, purple and yellow spreading like storm clouds beneath the surface. The split in his bottom lip had bled recently. Silas could smell the copper tang mixing with the salt of tears that had been swallowed instead of shed. There were other marks too. Older ones. A fading bruise on his forearm. Scratches on his knuckles that looked like they had come from falling. Or being pushed. How long? The question carved through Silas's mind like a knife. How long had this been happening? How many times had his son gone to bed with bruises he had to hide? How many nights had he cried into his pillow, muffling the sound because he had learned that crying made it worse? How long had Silas been too consumed with borders and politics and the weight of a crown to notice his own son was breaking? The maid was still in the doorway behind him. Silas could feel her presence like a living thing, her fear, her defiance, her desperate protective rage. She had not run, had not tried to explain or justify or beg forgiveness. She simply stood there, waiting, as if she expected him to destroy her and had already made peace with it, as if saving Torin had been worth her life. Silas took one step into the room, then another. Slow, controlled, the way one might approach a wounded animal. Torin's shoulders tensed. Just slightly. Just enough. That tiny flinch broke something fundamental in Silas's chest. His son was afraid of him. Not because Silas had ever raised a hand to him, he had not, would not, could not, but because someone had trained Torin to expect violence from the people who stood over him. Someone had taught his son that authority meant pain. Silas lowered himself slowly, carefully, until he was kneeling on the floor in front of Torin. Eye level. Unthreatening. His wolf howled at the submission of the posture, at the vulnerability of lowering himself, but Silas ignored it. This was not about dominance. This was not about power. This was about reaching a terrified child before he disappeared completely into silence. Torin's breathing was shallow, controlled. His eyes remained fixed on a point just past Silas's shoulder. The boy was somewhere else in his mind. Somewhere safer. Somewhere the pain could not reach. Silas had seen soldiers with that same look. Warriors who had endured torture and survived by leaving their bodies behind, by retreating into some inner fortress where the enemy could not follow. His son, his 6-year-old son, had that same look. The Alpha King's hands trembled as he reached out, moving with excruciating slowness, giving Torin every chance to pull away. His fingers, hands that had killed, hands that had conquered, hands that had never learned gentleness, brushed against his son's small cheek. Against the bruise that should never have existed. Torin's breath hitched. But he did not pull away. Did not move at all. Because he had learned that stillness was survival. Silas's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely recognizable. Rough. Raw. Stripped of every ounce of the commanding authority that usually lived there. Torin. Look at me, son. A command would not work. Commands were what the boy expected. What he had been trained to obey without question. So Silas tried something he had not done in years. He asked, "Please, let me see your eyes." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, so slowly it hurt to watch, Torin's gaze shifted. Found his father's face. And in those silver eyes, Silas saw the question that every abused child carries. Are you going to hurt me too? Or worse, are you going to make me go back to her? The Alpha's jaw clenched so hard he felt his teeth crack. His wolf surged forward, demanding blood, demanding justice, demanding the name of whoever had done this, so he could rip them apart with his bare hands. But he knew the name. He had known it the moment he scented the truth in the air. The moment he saw the maid's desperate eyes. The moment the pieces fell into their horrifying pattern. Vivian. His fated mate. The woman the moon goddess herself had chosen for him. The bond he had trusted above all others. The Luna his pack worshipped and his people adored. She had done this. Not in a moment of anger. Not in a loss of control. This was systematic. Calculated. The kind of cruelty that required planning and privacy and the absolute certainty that no one would stop her. Because who would dare question the fated mate of the Alpha King? Who would dare suggest that the blessed bond could be twisted? That fate could be wrong? The maid had dared. Silas turned his head slightly, his gaze finding Brielle where she stood in the doorway. She had not moved. Had not tried to slip away. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her knuckles white with tension. Her dark hair had fallen loose from its braid, framing a face that was too pale, too frightened, too young to carry the weight of what she had just done. But her eyes, deep brown and burning with an emotion Silas recognized, held steady. She was terrified. But she was not backing down. Something shifted in Silas's chest. Something unexpected. His wolf, which should have been focused solely on his son, on the threat, on the need to destroy and protect, suddenly became aware of her in a different way. This maid. This nobody. This girl with no rank, no name, no power. She had stepped between his son and danger. Had risked execution to protect a child that was not hers. Had looked a king in the eye and told him to stay silent. Had cared when everyone else had looked away. Who is she? The question burned in his mind, but it would have to wait. Torin needed him. Needed the father who had failed to see. Needed the protection that should have been absolute. Silas's thumb brushed gently across his son's uninjured cheek. When he spoke, his voice was a promise written in blood and fury, and the kind of love that could reshape kingdoms. No one will ever hurt you again. Do you understand me? No one. Torin's eyes widened. Something flickered there. Something fragile and desperate. But Luna, Vivian said. The boy's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse or screaming or both. She said I was bad. That I needed to be corrected. That it was her duty to make me strong because you were too busy to. No. The word cracked through the room like thunder. Silas forced himself to gentle his tone, but the fury beneath it was impossible to hide completely. You are not bad. You have never been bad. You are my son, my heir. And you are. His voice broke. Actually broke. The Alpha King, who had never shown weakness, who had never let emotion crack his armor, felt his throat close around words he should have said months ago. You are everything good in this world, Torin. Everything. A tear slipped down the boy's cheek. Just one. As if even crying required permission. Then why does she hate me? The question gutted Silas. Reached into his chest and tore out everything he thought he knew about bonds and fate and the natural order of the wolf world. Because the truth was ugly. The truth was unforgivable. Vivian hated Torin because he held Silas's heart. Because the boy represented the love Silas had shared with Torin's real mother, his first mate, who had died bringing their son into the world. Because no matter how blessed the fated bond was supposed to be, Vivian could not compete with a ghost and a child who carried her memory in his eyes. So she had tried to destroy that child instead. Silas pulled Torin into his arms, careful of the bruises, mindful of the pain, but unable to stop himself from holding his son close. The boy was stiff at first and used to the affection, uncertain if it was real or another trap. But then small hands fisted in Silas's shirt. And Torin shattered. The sobs were silent at first, just shaking shoulders and gasping breaths. Then sound broke through, raw, broken, the kind of crying that came from months of swallowed screams. Silas held him through it, one hand cradling his son's head, the other wrapped protectively around his small frame. And he let his own tears fall into his son's hair where no one could see them. Behind them, Brielle remained in the doorway. Silent. Witnessing. She did not intrude on the moment, did not try to slip away. She simply stood guard, as if her presence alone could keep the rest of the world at bay. Silas was aware of her in a way that defied explanation. His wolf, even in the midst of grief and rage, tracked her heartbeat. Noted the way her scent, lavender and something earthier, wilder, cut through the metallic tang of blood and fear. She was pack. His wolf was certain of it, even though her scent markers were odd, muted, as if she had been separated from her birth pack long ago. But more than that, she was safe. Trustworthy. Chosen. The thought came from somewhere primal, somewhere beyond conscious decision. His wolf had already made a judgment that his mind was still catching up to. This woman could be trusted with what mattered most. When Torin's sobs finally quieted into hiccuping breaths, Silas pulled back just enough to meet his son's eyes again. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Can you do that? Torin nodded, his face blotchy and wet. How long has this been happening? The boy's gaze dropped. Shame colored his cheeks, as if he were the one who had done something wrong. Since the moon after Mama's remembrance ceremony. For months. For months of systematic abuse. For months of a child suffering while Silas had been too blind, too trusting, too consumed with the demands of ruling to see what was happening in his own home. The guilt was a living thing, crushing and absolute. But beneath it, rage burned. Cold. Controlled. The kind of rage that did not explode. The kind that planned. That calculated. That destroyed completely. Silas stood, lifting Torin with him. The boy wrapped his legs around his father's waist, clinging like he was afraid to let go. Silas turned toward the doorway. Toward Brielle. She straightened immediately, her expression shifting from compassion to wariness. She expected punishment now. Expected the king to remember that she had overstepped, had dared to interfere, had witnessed the royal family at its most vulnerable. Instead, Silas studied her. Really looked at her for the first time. She was younger than he had initially thought. Mid-20s, perhaps. Her face was striking in an understated way, high cheekbones, full lips, eyes that held more depth than someone her age should possess. But it was not her appearance that held his attention. It was the way she stood. Afraid but unbroken. Ready to fight even though she knew she would lose. What is your name? The question seemed to surprise her. Her lips parted slightly before she answered. Brielle, my king. How long have you worked in my household, Brielle? 3 years, my king. 3 years. She had been invisible to him for 3 years. Just another servant in a fortress full of them. But she had seen what he had not. Had cared when it mattered. You saved my son tonight. It was not a question. Brielle's throat worked as she swallowed hard. I only did what anyone should have. No. Silas's voice was firm. Final. You did what no one else had the courage to do. You stepped between Aluna and her target. You ordered your alpha to silence. You risked everything. He moved closer, Torin still held securely in his arms. Brielle's eyes widened, but she held her ground. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Silas watched emotions flicker across her face. Fear. Defiance. And something else. Something that looked like grief. Because. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I know what it is to be a child who believes no one is coming. And I could not let him believe that. Not if I had the power to change it. There was a story there. Pain that echoed in her words. Silas's wolf leaned forward, curious, protective in a way that should not extend to a maid he barely knew. But before he could press further, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Multiple sets. Approaching quickly. Brielle went rigid. Silas's body shifted automatically into a protective stance, angling himself between his son and whatever was coming. The footsteps stopped just outside the chamber. And then Vivian's voice, honey-sweet and laced with false concern, drifted through the doorway. Darling? I heard you had returned. Is everything all right? I was told there was some disturbance in Torin's wing. Silas looked down at his son. Felt the way the boy had gone absolutely still in his arms. Saw the terror flood back into those silver eyes. Torin was not breathing. And Silas understood. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. He could confront Vivian now. Here. In front of witnesses. Could accuse his fated maid of abuse. Could watch the pack fracture as wolves were forced to choose between their Luna and their alpha's word. Or he could wait. Could gather evidence. Could plan his move with the strategic precision that had won him wars. But waiting meant sending Torin back into danger. Meant pretending he had not seen. Meant becoming complicit in his son's suffering. His wolf snarled. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. Silas met Brielle's eyes. Saw his own resolve reflected there. When he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of his authority. The voice of an alpha giving a command that would not be questioned. Brielle. From this moment forward, you are Torin's personal attendant. You will not leave his side. You will sleep in the chamber adjoining his. You will answer to no one but me. Is that understood? Brielle's eyes widened in shock. The position he was offering was prestigious, protected. It would elevate her from nameless maid to a member of his son's household. More importantly, it would give her the authority to keep Torin safe. My king, yes, I understand. Good. Silas turned toward the door, still holding Torin, his expression settling into the cold mask of control he wore in court. When Vivian appeared in the doorway, beautiful and poised and smiling with perfect concern, Silas looked at her and saw a stranger. The bond was still there. He could feel it, that pull fate had woven between them. But for the first time since it had snapped into place 2 years ago, he did not trust it. Because fate had given him a mate who tortured children. And fate, he was beginning to realize, could be wrong. Brielle's hands did not stop shaking until dawn. She sat in the small chamber adjoining Torin's room, her new room, though the reality of it still felt impossible, and watched the darkness outside the narrow window slowly give way to gray light. The Alpha King had dismissed Vivian with cold courtesy, had ordered servants to prepare Brielle's new quarters, and had stayed with Torin until the boy finally fell into an exhausted sleep. Then he had left without another word to her. But his command remained. She was Torin's protector now. Officially. Publicly. Which meant Vivian could not touch him without going through her first. It also meant Brielle had just painted a target on her own back the size of the moon. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs, willing the trembling to stop. Her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, agitated by the night's events, by the proximity to such powerful dominance, by the danger that now surrounded them on all sides. This was not supposed to happen. She was supposed to stay invisible, unremarkable, forgotten. That was the only way to stay alive. Brielle closed her eyes and let herself remember, just for a moment, the life she had tried so hard to bury. She had not always been a maid, had not always been nameless and powerless and alone. Once, a lifetime ago, she had been Brielle of the Ashenma pack, daughter of the Beta, heir to a bloodline that could be traced back 7 generations to the first wolves who had learned to walk in human skin. Once, she had been someone. And then her wolf had awakened. Most wolves experience their first shift during adolescence. It was a sacred time, a celebrated milestone. Families gathered. The pack watched with pride. A young wolf would feel the change coming, the fever, the restlessness, the pull of the moon, and they would shift surrounded by love and acceptance. Brielle's first shift had come during her 17th winter. And it had been wrong. She remembered the pain. That part was normal. The first shift always hurt as bones were formed and muscles tore and rebuilt themselves into something new. But what came after the pain was not normal. Most wolves shifted into forms that reflected their human selves. Browns and grays and blacks. Ordinary. Natural. Brielle's wolf had been silver. Not the pale gray that some wolves called silver. True silver. Moonlight made solid. A coat that seemed to glow with its own inner light, bright enough to see by in complete darkness. The pack had gone silent when they saw her. Her father's face had drained of color. Her mother had actually stepped back, as if seeing a stranger instead of her daughter. Because silver wolves were legend. Myth. The kind of thing whispered about in old stories, but never actually seen. Silver wolves were power. Dangerous power. The kind of power that kingdoms were built on. Or destroyed by. Brielle had not understood at first. Had been confused by the fear in her parents' eyes, by the way the other pack members had kept their distance. She had thought maybe it was just the shock of the color, that they would adjust, that everything would return to normal. It had not. Within a week, the whispers had started. Brielle was unnatural. Cursed. Too powerful for the pack to control. What if she challenged the alpha? What if she tried to take over? What if her very existence drew the attention of darker things, rival packs who would kill to possess that power, or worse, use her bloodline to breed armies? The elders had convened, had deliberated, had made their decision with the cold practicality of people who prized stability over loyalty. Brielle had to leave. Not as punishment, they had said. For her own protection. For the pack's safety. Surely she understood. Surely she could see that her presence put everyone at risk. Her father had delivered the message himself. His eyes had been hollow, grief-stricken. But he had not fought for her. Had not stood against the elders' decree. He had chosen the pack over his daughter. Brielle had been given 3 days to prepare. 3 days to say goodbye to the only life she had ever known. To pack what she could carry. To figure out how to survive alone in a world that feared what she was. Her mother had cried, had held her close and whispered apologies that meant nothing because they changed nothing. And then Brielle had walked out of Ashenma territory and had not looked back. That had been 8 years ago. 8 years of drifting from pack to pack, never staying long enough to draw attention. Never shifting where anyone could see. Never letting anyone close enough to ask questions. 8 years of learning to make herself small, quiet, forgettable. Because silver wolves drew attention. And attention meant danger. She had perfected the art of invisibility. Had learned to mute her scent markers, to dim the natural presence that dominance carried, to blend into the background until even other wolves forgot she was there. It had worked. For 8 years, it had worked. She had found work in the Alpha King's household 3 years ago, drawn by the anonymity that came with working in such a large, complex fortress. There were hundreds of servants. No one noticed one more maid. No one asked where she came from or why she never attended pack gatherings or why she always volunteered for the night shifts when fewer wolves were awake. She had been safe in her invisibility. Until tonight. Until a child's muffled whimper had cracked through her carefully constructed armor and reminded her that some things mattered more than survival. Brielle opened her eyes and looked toward the door that connected her chamber to Torrens. She could hear his breathing on the other side, deep and even now, the sleep of exhaustion and relief. She had saved him tonight, had stepped out of the shadows and into direct view of the most powerful wolves in 5 territories. And now there was no going back to invisible. The Alpha King had looked at her. Really looked at her. His silver eyes, so like his son's, had held a sharp intelligence that missed nothing. He had asked her name. Had elevated her position. Had placed his son in her care. Which meant he would be watching her now. And if he watched long enough, he would see what she had spent 8 years hiding. Fear curled cold in Brielle's stomach. But beneath it, something else stirred. Something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. Purpose. For 8 years, she had simply survived. Had existed in the spaces between notice. Had told herself it was enough. But holding Torren tonight, seeing the broken hope in his eyes, feeling the desperate grip of his small hand on her skirt, that had awakened something in her she thought she had buried with her old name. The need to matter. The need to protect. The need to be more than a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. Maybe her silver wolf had not been a curse. Maybe it had been preparing her for this. For the moment when a child needed someone brave enough to step between him and the monsters. Even if those monsters wore crowns. A soft knock on her door pulled Brielle from her thoughts. She stood quickly, smoothing her simple dress, her heart rate spiking. It was barely dawn. Who would? She opened the door. Silas stood in the corridor. Alone. The Alpha King had shed his formal coat. His shirt was unlaced at the throat, his dark hair disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it. He looked like he had not slept. The shadows under his eyes spoke of hours spent wrestling with thoughts too dark to face in daylight. But his gaze was clear. Focused. Intense in a way that made Brielle's wolf sit up and take notice. My king. She dropped into a curtsy automatically. Is something wrong? Does Torren need? He is fine. Still sleeping. Silas's voice was rough, quieter than she had ever heard it. He glanced past her into the small chamber, then back to her face. I need to speak with you. May I come in? Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous. That being alone with the Alpha King in her private chamber was the kind of impropriety that could destroy what little reputation she had. But he had asked. Not commanded. Asked. And his eyes held something that looked almost like vulnerability. Brielle stepped aside. Of course, my king. He entered, and the small space immediately felt smaller. His presence was overwhelming, not aggressive, but undeniable. The room seemed to bend around him, responding to the sheer force of his dominance. Silas did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, looking somehow out of place and perfectly at ease at the same time. When he spoke, his words were not what she expected. Tell me how you knew. Brielle blinked. My king. How you knew that Torren was being. He stopped. His jaw clenched. How you knew to look. The question hit deeper than he probably intended. Because the truth was complicated. Painful. Brielle wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture she could not quite suppress. I heard him. 3 nights ago. Crying. Very late, when the household was supposed to be asleep. Her voice was soft, remembering. It was not loud. Just small sounds. The kind that meant he was trying not to be heard. I thought maybe he was having a nightmare. She paused, gathering courage. But then I heard her voice. Luna Vivian. She was not comforting him. She was instructing him. Telling him to stop being weak. That future kings did not cry. That she was doing him a kindness by teaching him strength. Silas's hands curled into fists at his sides. But he did not interrupt. I almost left, Brielle admitted, shame coloring her voice. It was not my place. I had no right to question how the Luna chose to discipline the heir. But... She met his eyes, and something in his expression gave her the courage to continue. But I know what it sounds like when discipline becomes cruelty. I know the difference between a child learning and a child breaking. Her throat tightened. And Torin was breaking. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Loaded. You said earlier that you knew what it was like to be a child who believed no one was coming. It was not a question. Silas was giving her the choice to answer or deflect. Brielle could have lied. Should have lied. Should have kept her past buried where it belonged. But something about this moment, about the raw honesty in his exhausted eyes, about the shared understanding of what it meant to fail someone you were supposed to protect, made the truth spill out. I was rejected by my pack when I was 17. Silas went very still. Rejection was rare. Brutal. The kind of thing that left scars no one could see. Why? The question was gentle. Careful. As if he knew he was stepping on sacred ground. Brielle's hands trembled. She clasped them together. Because of what I am. She could have stopped there. Could have left it vague. But if she was going to be in Torin's life, if she was going to stand between him and danger, Silas deserved to know the risk he was taking. Deserved to know what he had just invited into his son's inner circle. Brielle took a breath. And then another. Her wolf stirred, nervous, uncertain. And for the first time in 8 years, she spoke the truth out loud. My wolf is silver, my king. True silver. My pack believed I was too dangerous to keep. Too powerful. Too likely to draw the wrong kind of attention. So they cast me out. She waited for the fear to appear in his eyes. For the calculation. For the moment when he realized she had lied by omission, had hidden what she was, had infiltrated his household under false pretenses. Waited for him to banish her the way her own family had. Instead, Silas studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You have been hiding your entire life. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. Sad. Understanding. Yes. Afraid that if anyone saw the real you, they would cast you out again. Yes. Silas took a step closer. Then another. Until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I need to ask you something, and I need your honesty. Can you give me that? Brielle nodded, not trusting her voice. Do you care about my son? The question caught her off guard. Of all the things he could have asked about her power, about her bloodline, about her intentions, he asked about Torin. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. I know I have no right to. I know he is not mine to protect. But yes, I care about him. Why? Because he reminded her of herself. Because she saw in his eyes the same desperate loneliness she had carried for 8 years. Because someone had to. But what she said was simpler. Truer. Because he deserves to be safe. And loved. And seen. Every child deserves that. Something shifted in Silas's expression. The exhaustion was still there. The rage simmering beneath his control was still evident. But beneath it all was something that looked almost like relief. I am going to ask something of you that is not fair. That puts you in more danger than you have already accepted. Brielle's pulse quickened. What do you need? Help me protect him. Silas's voice dropped, becoming almost a plea. I cannot remove Vivian from the household without cause that the pack will accept. The fated bond is sacred. If I break it without proof, the pack will fracture. Wolves will die in the chaos. But I also cannot leave Torin vulnerable while I gather evidence. He paused. His next words came slower. Heavier. I need someone I can trust absolutely. Someone who will put my son's safety above pack politics. Above rank. Above their own survival if necessary. His eyes held hers. I am asking you to be that person. Knowing that Vivian will come for you. Knowing that the danger you faced tonight was only the beginning. Brielle should have said no. Should have run. Should have protected the small, safe life she had built in the shadows. Instead, she heard herself say, I will protect him with my life, my king. You have my word. Silas's shoulders dropped slightly, as if he had been carrying a weight he could finally share. Thank you. The words were rough. Sincere. And Brielle? Yes, my king. Stop hiding your wolf. I do not care if you are silver or gold or midnight black. I care that you were brave enough to step between my son and danger when no one else would." His expression hardened into something fierce. "Protective. If anyone in this household has a problem with what you are, they will answer to me personally. Is that clear?" Tears burned behind Brielle's eyes. She blinked them back, nodding. For 8 years, she had been invisible. Forgettable. Nothing. And in one night, the most powerful alpha in 5 territories had looked at her and said she mattered. Had said she was enough. Silas turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. My king." My son flinched when I reached for him tonight. The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. He was afraid of me. Because someone taught him that the people who stand over him intend to hurt him. He looked back at her, and Brielle saw the guilt carved into every line of his face. "Help me teach him something different. Help me show him that he is safe now. That he matters. That he is." Silas's voice cracked. "That he is loved." Brielle's throat closed around emotion too big for words. So she simply nodded. Silas left without another word. And Brielle stood alone in her new chamber as dawn light spilled through the window, feeling the weight of the promise she had just made settle into her bones. She was not invisible anymore. She was Torrhen's protector. His shield. The wall between him and the monsters. And if Vivian wanted to hurt that child again, she would have to go through a silver wolf first. Let her try. The old wolf arrived on the 3rd day. Brielle had spent 72 hours in a state of hypervigilance that left her bones aching and her nerves frayed to threads. She had not left Torrhen's side except to sleep in brief, fitful stretches in the adjoining chamber. She had taken her meals with him, read to him, sat in comfortable silence while he played with wooden soldiers, and gradually, painfully gradually, watched some of the tension leave his small shoulders. The bruises were fading. The physical wounds would heal. But the invisible ones ran deeper, and Brielle saw them in the way Torrhen startled at sudden sounds, in the way his eyes tracked every door as if measuring escape routes, in the way he asked permission for things children should not have to ask permission for. "Can I have more water? Is it all right if I sit by the window? Am I being too loud?" Each question cracked something open in Brielle's chest. But there were moments, small, precious moments, when she glimpsed the child Torrhen should have been. When he laughed at a story she told him. When he fell asleep with his head on her lap, trusting enough to be vulnerable. When he asked her, in a voice barely above a whisper, if she would still be there when he woke up. Always, she had promised. "I will always be here." Silas visited every evening. The Alpha King would appear at sunset, still dressed in the formal attire of court or splattered with mud from the training grounds, and he would sit with his son. They did not talk much at first. The awkwardness between them was a living thing, built from months of distance and the fresh wound of betrayal. But Silas tried. He asked about Torrhen's day. Brought him small gifts, a carved wolf, a book of legends, a blanket in the deep blue Torrhen had mentioned liking once, months ago. The fact that Silas had remembered that detail seemed to stun the boy into silence. Brielle watched them navigate the careful dance of rebuilding trust, and something in her chest ached with an emotion she could not name. This was what family should look like. Messy. Imperfect. But trying. Vivian had not come. Had not sent messages or gifts or inquiries about Torrhen's well-being. The Luna had made herself scarce, appearing only at formal pack functions where her presence was required. When she and Silas occupied the same space, they moved around each other like planets in separate orbits, polite, cold, distant. The entire pack felt the shift. Whispers filled the corridors. Something had happened between the Alpha and his Luna. Something significant. But no one knew what, and no one dared ask. Brielle knew it was only a matter of time before the fragile peace shattered. Vivian was not the type to accept defeat quietly. She was planning something. Waiting for the right moment to strike back. The thought kept Brielle awake at night, her wolf pacing restlessly beneath her skin. So when the old wolf arrived, Brielle's first instinct was suspicion. She was walking with Torin through the castle's inner courtyard, a walled garden where he could get fresh air without being exposed to the entire pack, when she felt the air change. That particular electric shift that announced the presence of a wolf far older and more powerful than their appearance suggested. Torin felt it too. His hand tightened in hers. The woman who emerged from the shaded walkway looked ancient. Her hair was pure white, her face carved with lines that spoke of centuries rather than decades. But her eyes were sharp, clear, the pale blue of winter ice. She wore robes that marked her as a keeper, one of the wandering wolf mystics who served no pack, but were welcomed by all. Keepers were rare. Sacred. They carried the old knowledge, the prophecies and legends that most modern wolves had forgotten. They read signs in the bones and stars. They spoke to the moon goddess herself, or so the stories claimed. This one looked at Brielle, and her weathered face split into a smile that held too much knowing. There you are, child. I have been looking for you for a very long time. Brielle's wolf bristled. She pulled Torin slightly behind her, protective instinct overriding courtesy. You must be mistaken, honored keeper. I am no one. Just a silver wolf hiding in plain sight? The old woman's smile widened. Oh, I am not mistaken. The signs do not lie, and they have been screaming your name across the territories for weeks now. Cold fear slithered down Brielle's spine. If this woman knew what she was, if she spoke of it publicly, the fragile safety Brielle had found here would evaporate like morning mist. I do not know what you mean. The keeper laughed, a sound like wind chimes and distant thunder. Peace, little moon daughter. I have not come to expose you. I have come because the goddess herself sent me. She tilted her head, studying Brielle with unnerving intensity. Do you know what you are? Truly? I am a wolf. Nothing more. Liar. The word was not cruel, just factual. The keeper moved closer, her steps slow and measured. Torin pressed against Brielle's side, silent and watchful. You carry the blood of the first pack, child. The original wolves who walked between worlds when the moon was young and magic still sang in the earth's bones. The old woman's voice dropped into something that sounded like reverence. Silver wolves are not accidents. They are not random mutations or quirks of bloodline. They are chosen. Brielle's mouth went dry. Chosen for what? To stand between the darkness and the light. To protect when protection is needed most. To burn away corruption before it consumes everything. The keeper's ice-blue eyes bore into her. Tell me, child. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Dreams that feel more real than waking? A pull towards certain places or people? The sense that you are meant for something larger than the small life you have built? Yes. All of it, yes. But Brielle was not ready to admit that out loud. Was not ready to face what it might mean. The keeper seemed to read the answer in her silence. She nodded, satisfied. Come. There is something you need to see. I cannot leave Torin. My responsibility is to bring the boy. This concerns him as well. That stopped Brielle cold. She looked down at Torin, saw the curiosity warring with fear in his silver eyes. What do you mean this concerns him? Come and see. It was not a command. Not quite. But the weight behind the words suggested that refusing would be a mistake. The keeper turned and began walking toward the far end of the courtyard, toward a section of the castle Brielle had never explored. She should have refused. Should have taken Torin back inside, found Silas, reported this strange encounter. Instead, she felt her feet moving. Following. As if something deep inside her recognized this moment as inevitable. The keeper led them through a narrow door hidden behind overgrown ivy, down a spiral staircase that descended into the bones of the castle. The air grew colder. The stone walls changed from smooth, mortared blocks to rough-hewn rock that predated the current structure by centuries. Torin's grip on Brielle's hand was tight enough to hurt, but he did not complain. Did not ask to turn back. The staircase ended in a chamber that took Brielle's breath away. It was vast, circular, carved from living stone. The walls were covered in symbols, ancient pack markers, moon phases, and script so old Brielle could not read it. But she felt the power humming in those carved lines. felt it resonate in her bones like a struck bell. At the center of the chamber stood an altar. Simple, unadorned, just a flat stone surface worn smooth by time and touch. But above the altar, carved into the wall with painstaking detail, was an image that made Brielle's wolf surge forward in recognition. A silver wolf. Massive. Majestic. Standing beneath a full moon with its head thrown back in a howl that seemed to echo across centuries. And beneath the wolf, carved in script that Brielle somehow understood despite never having learned it, were words that burned themselves into her mind. When darkness wears the crown of light, when blood turns cold and children weep, the silver-born shall wake and fight. The moon's own daughter, strong and deep. The keeper's voice drifted through the chamber, soft and reverent. The prophecy of the silver-born. Written 300 years ago by a keeper who saw the future in a vision so powerful it burned out her eyes. The old woman moved to stand beside the altar, one gnarled hand resting on the stone. She spoke of a time when the wolf packs would face a threat from within. When corruption would take root in the highest places. When the bonds meant to unite would be twisted into chains. Brielle could not tear her eyes from the carving. The silver wolf seemed to move in the flickering torchlight, seemed to look directly at her. She said a silver wolf would rise when the need was greatest. Would stand between the innocent and the darkness. Would burn away the rot before it consumed everything. The keeper turned to face Brielle fully. You are that wolf, child. You are the silver-born the prophecy speaks of. No, that was impossible. Brielle was nobody. A rejected wolf who had spent 8 years hiding. She was not special. Not chosen. Not. I see the doubt in your eyes. You think you are too small. Too broken. Too ordinary. The keeper's expression gentled. But prophecy does not choose the strong, child. It chooses the willing. And you have already proven your willingness. You stepped between this boy and danger knowing it could cost you everything. Brielle's gaze dropped to Torin. He was staring at the carving with wide eyes, his expression a mixture of awe and something else. Something that looked like hope. What does this have to do with Torin? The keeper smiled sadly. Because the prophecy speaks of two, not one. The silver-born does not stand alone. She is joined by another. A child of both light and shadow. A young wolf who has walked through darkness and survived. The old woman looked at Torin with ancient eyes. A pup who carries the weight of a crown he has not yet earned and pain he should never have endured. Torin's breath hitched. Brielle felt him tremble against her side. The prophecy says the silver-born will protect the young king. Will teach him to burn bright instead of break. Will stand beside him when the final darkness comes. The keeper's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You were brought together for a reason, children. Your pain was not random. Your meeting was not coincidence. You are bound by something older than fate. Older than mate bonds or pack law. Brielle's mind reeled. This was too much. Too big. She was just trying to protect one child from one monster. She was not meant to fulfill ancient prophecies or save kingdoms or... I know you are afraid. The keeper's hand reached out, gnarled fingers gentle on Brielle's arm. I know you have spent your life running from what you are. But running time is over, Moondaughter. The darkness is already here. Already wearing a crown. Already spreading its poison through these halls. Vivian. She was talking about Vivian. You have a choice, as we all do. You can continue to hide. Continue to make yourself small. Continue to believe you are nothing. The old woman's grip tightened. Or you can accept what you were born to be. Not for glory. Not for power. But because a child needs you. Because this pack needs you. Because the goddess herself looked across all the wolves in all the territories and chose you. Tears burned in Brielle's eyes. Her wolf was howling, a sound of recognition and grief and reluctant acceptance. She had spent 8 years believing her silver wolf was a curse. A mark of shame. Something to hide. What if it had always been meant for this? For Torin? For standing between an innocent child and the darkness that wanted to consume him? Brielle looked at the carved wolf above the altar. At the way it stood proud and unafraid beneath the moon. At the power evident in every line of its form. And for the first time in 8 years, she let herself wonder what it would feel like to stop hiding, to stop running, to stand in the light and let her silver wolf shine. Terrifying. It would feel terrifying. But maybe also, right? The keeper stepped back, her task apparently complete. The choice is yours, child. It always has been. But know this, the darkness is coming. Sooner than you think. And when it does, you will have to decide who you are. The frightened girl who is cast out? Or the silverborn who stands and fights? Before Brielle could respond, footsteps echoed down the staircase. Heavy, purposeful, familiar. Silas appeared in the entrance to the chamber, his expression tight with concern and barely restrained power. His eyes swept the space, cataloging threats, before landing on Torin. "Are you all right?" "The guards said they saw you enter the old wing with a stranger and I." He stopped, stared. His gaze had found the carving above the altar, the silver wolf beneath the moon. When he looked at Brielle again, understanding dawned in his eyes. He had heard the prophecy. Every alpha was taught the old legends, even if most dismissed them as myth. He knew what the Silverborn was supposed to be, and he was looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. The keeper chuckled, the sound echoing strangely in the stone chamber. "The pieces are falling into place, young king. The question is whether you will have the wisdom to let them land where they are meant to." She turned her ice-blue gaze on Silas. "Your son is part of this. The prophecy names him, and the woman you have asked to protect him is far more than you bargained for." Silas's jaw tightened. But he did not look afraid, did not look doubtful. He looked at Brielle with something that might have been respect. Or recognition. "I do not care about prophecies," he said finally, his voice rough. "I care about my son's safety. If Brielle is willing to stand between him and danger, then I will stand beside her. Prophecy or not." The keeper's smile was knowing, satisfied. "Good answer, young king. You may survive this yet." She moved toward the staircase, her robes whispering against stone. "Wait," Brielle called out. "What am I supposed to do? If this prophecy is real, if I am meant to fight something, I do not know how. I do not know what." The old woman paused, looking back over her shoulder. "You will know when the moment comes, Moondaughter. Your wolf knows. Your blood knows. Trust them both." Her expression grew serious. "And whatever you do, do not let the darkness convince you that you are alone. The Silverborn does not stand alone. She never has." Then she was gone, climbing the stairs with surprising speed for someone her age, leaving Brielle and Silas and Torin standing in the ancient chamber beneath the carved image of a silver wolf that looked too much like Brielle's own. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken questions. Finally, Torin's small voice broke it. "Does this mean Brielle is magic?" Despite everything, the prophecy, the fear, the weight of destiny settling onto shoulders too tired to carry it, Brielle found herself smiling. "I do not know, little wolf. Maybe." Torin's hand squeezed hers. "I think you are. I think you are magic and strong and—" He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I am glad you are here. Even if you are supposed to save the world or whatever. I am just glad you are here." Brielle's throat closed around emotion too big for words. She knelt down, bringing herself to Torin's eye level. "I am glad I am here too. And whatever happens, whatever I am supposed to be or do, that does not change. I am yours, Torin. Your protector. Your shield. That is the only prophecy I care about." The boy's arms came around her neck in a fierce hug. And Brielle held him, this child who had survived so much, this young king the prophecy claimed was hers to protect. Over his head, her eyes met Silas's. The Alpha was watching them with an expression that made something warm and dangerous unfurl in Brielle's chest. Not pity. Not gratitude. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like belonging. But before she could examine that too closely, Silas's expression shifted. Hardened. His head tilted slightly, the way wolves did when they heard something on the wind. When he spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "We need to go. Now." What is wrong? Vivian has called a pack assembly. She is demanding an audience with the entire council. Silas's eyes blazed silver. She is making her move. The great hall was already filled when they arrived. Brielle's heart hammered against her ribs as she walked beside Silas, her hand clasped tightly around Torrens. The boy pressed close to her side, his earlier wonder replaced by the familiar tension of fear. He could feel the electricity in the air, the anticipation, the sense that something significant was about to fracture. The pack filled the hall from wall to wall. Wolves of every rank and station, summoned by their Luna's call. They lined the balconies, crowded the floor, their eyes tracking Silas as he moved toward the raised dais where the Alpha's throne sat beside the slightly smaller Luna's chair. Vivian was already there. She stood beside her throne in a gown of deepest crimson, her golden hair arranged in elaborate braids, her beauty so perfect it looked carved from marble. She smiled as Silas approached, but the expression never reached her eyes. Those eyes, pale green and cold as winter frost, found Brielle in the crowd, and promised violence. Brielle's wolf snarled low in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to get Torren out of this hall, away from whatever was coming. But Silas had asked her to stay, had said he needed witnesses, needed the pack to see. So she stayed, even as dread coiled cold in her stomach. Silas took his place on the dais without acknowledging Vivian. The slight was subtle but deliberate. The pack noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. The Alpha raised one hand, and silence fell instantly. Absolute. The kind of obedience that came from instinct and centuries of hierarchy. His voice, when he spoke, carried to every corner of the vast hall. Our Luna has called assembly. I assume she has reason. Vivian's smile sharpened. She moved with fluid grace to stand at the edge of the dais, positioning herself where the entire pack could see her, where the light from the high windows cast her in an almost ethereal glow. I do, my king. Though it pains me to bring this matter before the pack, I fear I have no choice. Her voice was honey and silk, each word carefully weighted. It concerns the safety of our future Alpha, of our beloved son. She said our son like a caress, like a claim. And Brielle saw Torren flinch. Silas's expression remained neutral, but his hands gripped the arms of his throne hard enough that Brielle heard would creak. Continue. Vivian turned to face the assembled pack, one hand pressed delicately to her chest in a gesture of pained sincerity. 3 days ago, my mate returned home to find our son in the care of a servant. A maid with no training, no credentials, and no authority to be in the young prince's private chambers. Her gaze swept the crowd, gauging reactions. When I attempted to inquire about this irregular arrangement, I was informed that this person had been elevated to the position of Torren's personal attendant. Without consultation, without approval from the council or the Luna. Murmurs rose from the crowd. Confused, uncertain. Wolves looked at each other, trying to understand the significance. Brielle's pulse thundered in her ears. This was it. The attack she had been waiting for. Vivian's voice rose, carrying easily over the murmurs. I am certain my mate had his reasons. Perhaps he believed this girl had some qualification I was unaware of. So I investigated. She paused for effect. And what I discovered was deeply troubling. Here it comes, Brielle thought. The exposure. The revelation of what she was. Vivian had somehow discovered the truth about her silver wolf, and she was going to use it to have Brielle cast out. To isolate Torren again. This woman, Brielle, I believe her name is, has no pack affiliation. No family. No history that can be verified. Vivian's expression morphed into concern, so convincing it was almost believable. She appeared 3 years ago with nothing but a fabricated story and has been working in our household ever since. And now she has been given unrestricted access to the heir to our throne. The murmurs grew louder, more agitated. I am not suggesting any ill intent, Vivian continued, her voice dripping with false reasonableness. But surely the pack can see the danger in allowing an unknown, unvetted wolf to be alone with our future king. For all we know, She could be a spy, an assassin sent by rival packs, a rogue with designs on our bloodline. Brielle's hands went cold. This was clever. Vivian was not exposing what Brielle was, she was making her unknown status into a weapon, turning the pack's natural suspicion against her. And it was working. Brielle could see it in the faces around her. The doubt, the fear, the protective instinct that made wolves circle their young and bare their teeth at strangers. As Luna, as the mother to our prince, I must ask, why was this decision made without my input? Vivian turned to face Silas, her expression hurt and confused. Why was I not consulted about who would have such intimate access to our son? Unless... She paused, letting the implication hang. Unless there was some reason my mate did not trust me with this decision. There it was. The real attack. Vivian was not just questioning Brielle. She was questioning Silas's judgment, his authority, his fitness to rule. She was forcing him to choose. Defend his decision to elevate Brielle, which would require explaining why, would require revealing Vivian's abuse to the pack. Or back down, remove Brielle from Torin's side, and prove that the Luna could overrule the Alpha's commands. Either way, Vivian won. Silas stood slowly. The movement was controlled, deliberate, but Brielle could see the rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. Could see the way his wolf pressed against his skin, demanding to be released. You question my authority, Luna? The words were quiet. Dangerous. Vivian's expression remained carefully neutral, but Brielle saw the flash of triumph in her eyes. Never, my king. I question only the process. Surely you can see how it appears to the pack. A stranger elevated to a position of trust without explanation, without transparency. She spread her hands in a gesture of helplessness. I am merely concerned for our son's safety, as any mother would be. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that Brielle almost believed it herself. But Torin's hand tightened in hers, his small fingers gripping hard enough to hurt. He knew. He saw the monster beneath the performance. And Brielle realized with dawning horror that if Silas tried to defend her now, tried to explain the truth, Vivian would simply deny it. Would paint Silas as unstable, paranoid, willing to believe a servant over his own fated mate. The pack would have to choose sides. And a pack divided was a pack destroyed. Silas knew it too. Brielle could see the calculation in his eyes. The terrible math of choosing between justice and stability. She could not let him make that choice. Could not let him fracture his pack to protect her. Before Silas could respond, Brielle stepped forward. The movement drew every eye in the hall. Wolves turned to stare at her, this unknown maid who had somehow become the center of a conflict between their Alpha and Luna. Brielle's voice was steady, even as her insides twisted with fear. Luna, Vivian is right to question my presence. Silas's head snapped toward her, his expression shocked. Torin made a small sound of protest. But Brielle pushed forward, her words careful, measured. I have no pack affiliation. No credentials. I am nobody of importance. She met Vivian's eyes across the hall. But I have served this household faithfully for 3 years. I have worked in the kitchens, the laundry, the stables. I have never stolen, never caused trouble, never given anyone reason to doubt my loyalty. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the crowd. Some wolves looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with open curiosity. The Alpha elevated me because his son needed someone. Not someone important. Not someone with credentials or rank. Just someone who saw a child in pain and chose to help. Her voice strengthened. If that makes me unqualified, then yes. I am unqualified. But I will not apologize for protecting a child who needed protection. The implication was subtle but unmistakable. Why did Torin need protection? From what? Vivian's smile faltered for just a moment. Just long enough for Brielle to see the fury flash across her perfect features. How noble, the Luna said, her voice dripping with condescension. But nobility does not make you safe. Does not make you trustworthy. For all we know, you staged some incident to gain the Alpha's favor. To insert yourself into our family for purposes we cannot yet see. She turned to address the pack again, her voice rising with righteous anger. I move that this woman be removed from her position immediately, that she be questioned thoroughly about her origins and intentions, and that my mate remember that the Luna's council exists for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of reckless decision. The words hung in the air like a thrown blade. The pack waited, hundreds of wolves holding their breath, waiting to see which way their leaders would break. Silas's expression was carved from ice and fury. Brielle could see the war raging behind his eyes. The need to defend her. The need to protect his son. The need to keep his pack whole. She had to give him a way out. Had to remove herself as the point of fracture. Brielle released Torrent's hand gently, ignoring his soft sound of protest. She took a step back, her head held high even as her heart splintered. If my presence causes such division, then I will remove myself. I will submit to questioning. Will provide whatever proof of my intentions the council requires. Her eyes found Silas's, trying to communicate everything she could not say aloud. The pack's unity matters more than one mate's position. It was the right thing to say. The noble thing. The thing that would allow Silas to save face, to maintain his authority without directly contradicting his Luna. But it also meant leaving Torrent unprotected. Meant allowing Vivian to win. Brielle saw the moment Silas understood what she was offering him. Saw the gratitude and the rage and the helplessness war across his face. But before he could accept or refuse, a voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. That will not be necessary. Every head turned toward the entrance to the great hall. The keeper stood in the doorway, her white hair seeming to glow in the afternoon light. She walked forward with slow, measured steps, and the crowd parted before her like water before a ship's prow. Keepers commanded respect that transcended pack law. Their word carried the weight of the goddess herself. Vivian's expression tightened, but she could not protest without insulting sacred tradition. The old woman climbed the steps to the dais with surprising ease. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the hall without shouting. The Luna questions this woman's origins and intentions. Very well. I will provide clarity. She turned to face the assembled pack. This woman is Brielle of the Ashenma pack, daughter of Beta Corvin. She was cast out 8 years ago for the crime of being too powerful, too dangerous, too valuable for her birth pack to keep without drawing the attention of those who would use her bloodline for their own purposes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Beta blood was nothing to dismiss. But being cast out was a mark of shame that did not easily wash away. She came to this pack seeking only anonymity. Safety. A quiet life where her power would not be a curse. The keeper's ice-blue eyes swept the hall. But the goddess has other plans. As she so often does. The old woman moved to stand directly behind Brielle, one gnarled hand resting on her shoulder. This woman is the Silverborn. The one named in prophecy. The wolf chosen by the goddess herself to stand between darkness and light. To protect the innocent. To burn away corruption before it consumes us all. The hall erupted. Wolves shouted questions, protests, demands for proof. The noise was deafening. But Brielle could only stare at the keeper in horror. This was not helping. This was making everything worse. Now she was not just an unknown maid. She was a prophesied figure with power no one could verify. She was a threat on an entirely different scale. Vivian's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and mocking. Prophecy? You expect us to believe that this servant is some mystical savior? She laughed, the sound crystalline and cruel. Show us then. If she is so powerful, so chosen, let her prove it. Let her shift and show us this legendary silver wolf. The challenge hung in the air. Undeniable. Perfect. Because if Brielle shifted, if she revealed her true form, the pack would see her power. Would see that she was everything the prophecy claimed. But they would also see her as a threat. As something too dangerous to keep close to their future alpha. As something that needed to be controlled. Or eliminated. And if she refused to shift, she would be branded a liar. A fraud. Would be cast out, or worse, for deceiving the Alpha and fabricating prophecy. Either way, Vivian won. Brielle looked at Silas. saw the same calculation in his eyes. Saw him trying to find a third option, a way to protect her and his son and his pack all at once. But there was no third option. This was the moment the Keeper had warned about. The moment when Brielle had to choose who she was. The frightened girl who was cast out? Or the Silverborn who stood and fought? Brielle's wolf surged forward, howling with rage and recognition and desperate, terrible acceptance. She had spent 8 years running. 8 years hiding. 8 years believing her power was a curse. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to burn. Brielle stepped away from the Keeper, away from Silas, into the open space at the center of the hall. Every eye tracked her movement. Hundreds of wolves holding their breath. She looked at Torin one last time. Saw the fear and hope warring in his silver eyes. Saw him mouth a single word. Please. He was not asking her to shift. He was asking her to stay. To not leave him like everyone else had left him. And Brielle realized, with crystalline clarity, that there was only one way to stay. She had to become something the pack could not dismiss, could not cast out, could not ignore. She had to become the prophecy. Her hands moved to the fastenings of her simple dress. The pack watched in silence as she shed the clothing that marked her as a servant. As nothing. As forgettable. Then she closed her eyes, reached for the wolf she had kept caged for 8 years, and let her go. The shift was agony and ecstasy. Bones reformed. Muscles tore and rebuilt. Skin gave way to fur. The pain was white-hot and absolute, but Brielle welcomed it. This was who she was. This was what she had been running from. This was the truth she had hidden for so long that she had almost forgotten it was beautiful. When the shift completed, when she stood on 4 legs instead of 2, the great hall fell into absolute silence. Because standing in the center of the Alpha's court, beneath the high windows where afternoon sun spilled like liquid gold, was a wolf carved from moonlight itself. Silver. Pure, luminous, impossible silver. Her coat seemed to glow with its own inner light, catching and reflecting the sun until she looked like a star brought to earth. She was larger than any normal wolf, her form powerful and graceful in equal measure. Her eyes, still brown, still hers, looked out at the pack with a defiance that dared them to look away. This was the wolf the prophecy spoke of. This was the Silverborn. And every wolf in the hall felt the power radiating from her like heat from a flame. Vivian's face had gone white. Not with fear. With rage. With the realization that she had just forced Brielle to reveal a power that could not be denied or dismissed or controlled. But it was Silas's reaction that made Brielle's heart stutter. The Alpha King had dropped to one knee. His head was bowed. His hand was pressed flat against his chest in a gesture of recognition, of respect. And one by one, following their Alpha's lead, the pack knelt. Hundreds of wolves lowering themselves before a silver wolf who had been nobody mere moments ago. The only one still standing was Vivian. The Luna stood frozen on the dais, her perfect composure finally cracking, her expression twisting into something ugly and hateful and absolutely murderous. When she spoke, her voice shook with barely controlled fury. This proves nothing. Power does not equal trustworthiness. If anything, this makes her more dangerous. More of a threat to our future king. Her pale eyes blazed with venom. I call for her to be bound. Controlled. Contained until we can verify that she is not a danger to this pack. She was demanding Brielle's imprisonment. Demanding she be treated like a weapon too dangerous to be left free. But before Silas could respond, before the pack could react, Torin's small voice cut through the tension. No. The word was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the hall, it carried. The boy stepped forward, moving away from the safety of the crowd, walking toward the silver wolf standing in the center of the hall. His small frame was rigid with determination, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She is not dangerous. She is kind. And brave. And the only one who... His voice cracked. The only one who protected me when no one else would. The implication hung in the air like smoke. When no one else would. Not the pack. Not the guards. Not his father. Not his stepmother. Vivian's expression twisted further. She took a step toward Torin, her hand reaching out. Torin, darling, you do not understand. This woman has manipulated you. Has made you believe. Do not touch me. The words exploded from Torin with a force that shocked the entire hall. The boy stumbled backward, away from Vivian's reaching hand, his silver eyes wide with fear and fury. You are not my mother. You will never be my mother. And I do not want you near me ever again. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian stood frozen, her hand still outstretched, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Shock, rage, humiliation. And beneath it all, the cold calculation of someone whose carefully constructed facade had just been shattered by a 6-year-old child. Torin turned away from her and walked straight to the silver wolf. He dropped to his knees in front of Brielle, his small hands burying themselves in her luminous fur. And he started to cry. Not silent, controlled tears. Real, loud, broken sobs. The sound cut through every wolf in the hall. Wolves protected their young, cherished their pups. The sound of a child crying like that, with such desperate relief and grief combined, triggered every protective instinct the pack possessed. They did not know the full story, did not understand exactly what had happened, but they understood enough. Their future alpha had been suffering, and their Luna had not protected him. Brielle shifted back to human form, her transformation quick and controlled. Someone threw a cloak over her shoulders before she had fully reformed. She wrapped her arms around Torin and held him while he shattered, her own tears falling into his hair. On the dais, Silas stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice was colder than Brielle had ever heard it. This assembly is over. Everyone out. Now. The pack moved immediately, filing out of the hall in silence, their eyes averted, their expressions troubled. Only Vivian remained, standing alone on the dais like a queen whose kingdom had just crumbled beneath her feet. Silas looked at her with eyes that held nothing but ice. We will speak. Privately. But first. He descended from the dais and walked to where Brielle knelt with his son. His hand rested gently on Torin's head. First, I am going to make sure my son is safe. The emphasis on my son was deliberate. Cutting. Vivian's hands curled into fists. But she said nothing, simply turned and swept from the hall, her crimson gown trailing behind her like blood. When she was gone, Silas knelt beside Brielle and Torin. His arms came around both of them, sheltering and protective. And in the empty great hall, 3 broken souls held each other and tried to figure out how to survive what came next. Because Vivian had been publicly humiliated. Publicly rejected by the child she had tortured. Publicly overshadowed by a silver wolf she could not control. And wolves like Vivian did not forgive. They destroyed. The moon was 3 days from full when Silas found Brielle on the western ramparts. She stood alone in the silver light, her dark hair loose and whipping in the wind that always howled through the mountain passes at night. She had not heard him approach, or if she had, she chose not to acknowledge his presence. Her gaze was fixed on the distant peaks, on horizons she could not quite reach, and something about her stillness made Silas's chest ache in ways he did not have words for. 5 days had passed since the assembly. 5 days since Brielle had shifted in front of the entire pack and shattered every assumption they had held about power and prophecy and the invisible maid who served their meals. 5 days since Vivian had retreated to her private wing and had not emerged. The Luna's silence was more terrifying than her presence had ever been. Silas knew his mate knew the cold calculation behind her beauty, the patience she possessed when planning revenge. She was waiting, watching, gathering her strength for a strike that would cut deeper than any that had come before. But tonight, standing on the ramparts with the wind carrying the scent of pine and distant snow, Silas allowed himself to stop thinking about his poisonous mate and focus on the woman who had become the center of his thoughts in ways that defied every rule of fate and bonds. Brielle, the Silver-born, the prophecy made flesh. The maid who had stepped between his sun and darkness without hesitation. The woman who made his wolf sit up and pay attention in ways that had nothing to do with dominance or hierarchy and everything to do with recognition. She still had not looked at him. But she spoke, her voice soft enough that the wind almost carried it away. "You should not be here, my king. People will talk." Silas moved to stand beside her at the stone railing, close enough to feel her warmth, careful not to crowd her space. "People are already talking. Let them." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Your Luna will not appreciate you spending time alone with me, especially after what happened in the hall." Vivian lost the right to appreciate or object to anything when she laid hands on my son. The words came out harsher than he intended, edged with the rage that simmered constantly beneath his surface now. The rage he could not fully express because an alpha did not show weakness, did not show doubt, did not reveal that his entire world had been built on foundations of sand. Brielle finally turned to look at him, her brown eyes searching his face in the moonlight. "You have not confronted her directly. The pack is waiting for you to make a move, to demand answers. To..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "To dissolve the bond." Silas's hands tightened on the stone railing. The faded bond with Vivian was still there, still humming beneath his skin like a constant irritation. The moon goddess had chosen her for him, had woven their souls together in a tapestry that was supposed to be unbreakable. But the bond felt wrong now. Corrupted. Like fruit that looked perfect on the outside, but was rotting from within. Breaking a faded bond without absolute proof of betrayal would fracture the pack. Half would stand with me. Half would claim I was defying the goddess herself. He looked out at the dark mountains, his voice dropping. Wolves would die in the chaos. Families would be torn apart. And Vivian knows this. She knows I am trapped. You are not trapped. You are being strategic. There is a difference. Silas glanced at her, surprised by the understanding in her tone. Most wolves would have pushed him to act immediately, to let rage dictate his choices. But Brielle understood the weight of leadership in a way that should not be possible for someone so young. "You sound like you have experience navigating impossible choices." Brielle's expression shuddered slightly. She turned back to the mountains, her arms wrapping around herself against the cold. "I spent 8 years making myself invisible because the alternative was death or enslavement. I learned that sometimes survival requires patience. Requires waiting for the right moment instead of the satisfying one." Her voice grew quieter. "I learned that being right is not always enough. That power without strategy is just another way to lose." Silas studied her profile in the moonlight. She was beautiful in an understated way, the kind of beauty that grew more striking the longer you looked. But it was not her appearance that held his attention. It was the strength evident in every line of her posture. The quiet resilience that came from surviving things that should have broken her. "Tell me about them. The pack that cast you out." Brielle's breath caught. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Silas thought she might refuse. Might keep that pain locked away where she had learned to hide everything that mattered. But then she spoke, her words halting at first, then flowing like a dam had finally cracked. "Ashenma was everything to me. My father was Beta. My mother was beloved. I had friends, cousins, a future already mapped out. I was supposed to mate with the Alpha's second son, take my place in the pack hierarchy, raise pups who would carry our bloodline forward." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I had never questioned any of it. Had never wanted anything different. I was happy." The past tense hung heavy between them. "And then I shifted for the first time, and everything I knew turned to ash." Her hands gripped her arms tighter. "They were afraid of me. My own parents looked at me like I was a stranger. Like I had become something dangerous overnight. And maybe I had. Maybe the Silver Wolf did make me dangerous. But I would never have hurt them. Would never have used my power against my own pack. But they did not give you the chance to prove that. No. The elders decided I was too much of a risk. Too tempting a target for rival packs who might try to steal me. Too powerful to be controlled if I ever decided to challenge authority." Her voice cracked slightly. "My father delivered the banishment order himself. told me it was for my own good. For the pack's safety. That surely I understood. Silas's wolf snarled low in his chest. The idea of a father choosing politics over his own child made him physically ill. Made him think of Torin, of how close he had come to failing his own son through blindness and misplaced trust. I am sorry. You deserved better. Brielle looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. As if she had not expected an Alpha King to apologize to a former servant. We all carry scars from the people who were supposed to protect us, she said softly. Yours are just more recent than mine. The observation was gentle but precise. Silas felt something in his chest crack open. He had spent days maintaining perfect control, showing the pack nothing but strength and certainty. But here, on the ramparts with only the moon as witness, he felt the facade crumble. I trusted her. The words tasted like poison. Vivian. The bond told me she was my perfect match. The goddess's gift. I felt the pull the moment we met, and I thought. He stopped, his throat tight. I thought fate could not be wrong. You loved her. It was not a question. And Silas found he could not answer it. Had he loved Vivian? Or had he loved the idea of what the bond represented? The promise of a mate who would understand him, complete him, stand beside him through everything? I trusted her, he repeated, because that was the truth he could articulate. I brought her into my home, introduced her to my son, asked her to help him heal from losing his mother. I gave her access to the most precious thing in my world, and she, his hands curled into fists. She destroyed him. Slowly, methodically, while I was too blind to see. You were not blind. You were deceived. There is a difference. Is there? A good father would have noticed. Would have seen the fear in his son's eyes. Would have questioned why Torin stopped laughing, stopped playing, stopped being a child. Silas's voice broke. I failed him. And no amount of strategy or planning or political maneuvering changes that fundamental truth. Brielle was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked him. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and cold against his, but her grip was firm. Steady. The touch sent electricity racing up his arm, made his wolf surge forward with interest and something that felt dangerously close to longing. You did fail him, she said, and the honesty of it was somehow more comforting than platitudes would have been. You missed what was happening. You trusted the wrong person. You put pack politics above your instincts. She squeezed his hand. But you also saved him the moment you knew the truth. You elevated someone with no rank or standing because your son needed protection. You knelt in front of your entire pack to honor the woman who revealed a power that could threaten your rule. You chose Torin over politics, over the bond, over everything. Silas stared at their joined hands, at the way her pale fingers laced through his darker ones. That does not erase the damage done. No. But it starts the healing. Brielle's thumb traced circles on the back of his hand, the gesture unconscious and devastating. Torin is getting better. He laughs now. He plays. He asks questions instead of just obeying. He is learning to be a child again. That is because of you. Because you gave him safety and showed him that the people who stand over him can also protect him. Something warm and painful unfurled in Silas's chest. He turned to face her fully, their hands still joined, close enough now that he could see the silver flecks in her brown eyes. Close enough to count her heartbeats in the pulse at her throat. How do you do that? Do what? Make me feel like I am not drowning. Like there is still ground beneath my feet even when everything is falling apart. Brielle's breath caught. Her eyes widened slightly, and Silas saw the moment she became aware of how close they were standing. How intimate this had become. She should pull away. Should remember that he was still bonded to another woman, that mate bonds were sacred, that this, whatever this was building between them, was forbidden. But she did not pull away. Neither did he. I see you, Brielle whispered, echoing the words she had said about Torin. The parts you show the pack and the parts you hide. The alpha who rules with absolute authority and the father who is terrified of failing his son again. The king who makes impossible decisions and the man who stands on ramparts in the middle of the night because the weight of the crown is crushing him. Her free hand rose, hesitated, then touched his face with heartbreaking gentleness. I see all of you, Silas. And I am not afraid. His name on her lips was his undoing. Silas closed the remaining distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Her skin was soft and cold from the wind, and she leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. You should be afraid, he murmured, his voice rough. I am bonded to a woman who wants you dead. I am an alpha with a fractured pack and enemies circling. I have a son who needs my focus and a throne that demands everything. I have nothing to offer you but danger and complications and a future that looks like war. I know. Then why are you still here? Brielle's eyes searched his, and what he saw there made his heart stutter. Understanding. Acceptance. And something that looked terrifyingly like hope. Because some things are worth the danger. Some people are worth the complications. Her hand covered his where it rested against her face. And, because when I am with you and Torin, I do not feel invisible anymore. I feel like I matter. Like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The space between them was measured in heartbeats and held breath and the electric pull that had nothing to do with fated bonds and everything to do with choice. Silas leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, his eyes closing as he breathed her in. Lavender and earth and something wild that was uniquely hers. His wolf was practically vibrating with need, with the desire to claim and protect and keep this woman close. But the bond with Vivian still hummed beneath his skin. A constant reminder. A chain he could not yet break. I cannot give you what you deserve, he whispered against her skin. Cannot court you properly. Cannot claim you the way every instinct in me is screaming to do. Not while I am still bound to her. I know. But I want to. Gods, Brielle, I want to. Her breath shuddered out. I know that too. They stood frozen in that moment, balanced on the knife's edge between honor and desire. Silas's lips were a breath away from hers. All he had to do was close the distance. All he had to do was take what every cell in his body was begging for. But he did not. Because Brielle deserved better than stolen kisses in the dark. Deserved better than being someone's secret. Deserved to be claimed properly, publicly, with honor instead of shame. So he pulled back, just enough to meet her eyes again, his hand still cradling her face like she was something precious. When I am free of her, when I can offer you more than shadows and complications, ask me again to see me. To stay. Too. He stopped, the words too big to speak aloud. But Brielle heard them anyway. He saw it in the way her eyes softened, in the small smile that touched her lips. When you are free, I will still be here. I will still see you. And I will still choose to stay. She rose on her toes, and for one heart-stopping moment, Silas thought she would kiss him despite everything. Instead, she pressed her lips to his forehead. A benediction. A promise. You are worth waiting for, Silas. Both of you are. Then she stepped back, her hand slipping from his, leaving him cold and aching and more certain than he had ever been about anything. The bond with Vivian was a lie. Whatever the goddess had intended, whatever fate had decreed, it was wrong. Because the woman walking away from him on the ramparts, the one who had shown him more genuine care in days than his fated mate had in years, felt more right than anything in his life had ever felt. And he would do whatever it took to free himself from the poison bond. Whatever it took to earn the right to choose his own fate. To choose her. The attack came at dawn. Brielle woke to Torin screaming. She was on her feet and through the connecting door before conscious thought caught up with instinct, her wolf surging forward, ready to fight, ready to kill whatever had put that sound of pure terror in the boy's throat. But Torin's chamber was empty except for the child himself, tangled in his bedsheets, thrashing against invisible enemies, his small face contorted with nightmare-spawned fear. Just a dream. Just a nightmare. Brielle's racing heart slowed fractionally as she crossed to the bed and gathered Torin into her arms, rocking him gently, murmuring soothing nonsense until his screams dissolved into broken sobs. "Shit, little wolf. You're safe. I am here. You're safe." But even as she said the words, ice slithered down her spine. Because Torin's nightmares had been getting better, not worse. He had been sleeping through the night for the past 3 days. Had been smiling more. Playing more. Healing. This felt like a regression. Or something worse. Something deliberate. Torin's sobs quieted eventually, but he clung to her with desperate strength, his small body shaking. "She was here," he whispered against her shoulder. "In my dream. She said you were going to leave. That everyone always leaves. That I am poison, and that is why Mama died and why you will die too, and—" "Stop." Brielle pulled back just enough to meet his tear-stained eyes. "Look at me, Torin. That was not real. That was just a nightmare. I am not going anywhere. But what if? No. No what ifs. I am here. I am real. And I am not leaving you." She held him until his breathing steadied, until the trembling stopped, until he fell back into exhausted sleep against her shoulder. But even after she laid him gently back in bed and pulled the covers up to his chin, unease prickled across her skin. The nightmare had felt wrong. Too vivid. Too targeted. Brielle moved to the window and looked out at the lightning sky. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt ominous. She was still standing there when shouting erupted from somewhere deep in the castle. Then running footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving fast. Then a sound that made every hair on Brielle's body stand on end. The howl of a wolf in mourning. No. She checked on Torin one more time, still sleeping, the nightmares finally released, then slipped into the corridor. Other wolves were emerging from their chambers, confused, frightened. The mourning howl echoed again, and this time others joined it. The sound built into a chorus of grief that shook the stone walls. Someone had died. Brielle's wolf pushed forward, anxious, as she followed the sound through corridors and down staircases until she emerged into the great hall. And stopped dead. The hall was filled with wolves. Pack members in various states of dress, clearly roused from sleep by the commotion. They crowded around the center of the space, where Silas stood with his shoulders rigid and his expression carved from ice. At his feet lay a body. Brielle could not see who it was through the crowd, but she could smell the blood. Could feel the grief radiating from the assembled wolves like heat. She pushed through the crowd, using her smaller size to slip between larger wolves, driven by terrible certainty. When she finally reached the inner circle and saw what lay at the Alpha's feet, her world tilted. It was the Keeper. The old woman who had revealed Brielle's identity. Who had spoken of prophecy and destiny. Who had looked at her with ice-blue eyes that saw too much. She lay on the cold stone floor with her white robes stained crimson and her throat torn open. The killing blow had been delivered by claws. Wolf claws. The savagery of it spoke of rage, not necessity. This had not been a quick death. Brielle's stomach turned. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting nausea. Who found her? Silas's voice was deadly quiet. A young guard stepped forward, his face pale. "I did, my king." She was in the old temple. The one beneath the eastern wing. "Where's she?" He glanced at Brielle. "Where she took the boy and the maid a few days ago. The chamber with the prophecy. The carved silver wolf." Someone had killed the Keeper in the place where she had revealed the truth about Brielle. That was not coincidence. "Who else knows about this?" Silas demanded. "Just those who responded to my call. Maybe 20 wolves. But word is spreading fast." As if summoned by the statement, Vivian appeared at the edge of the crowd. The Luna looked perfect despite the early hour. Her hair was arranged flawlessly. Her gown was pristine. Her expression was carefully composed into appropriate shock and grief. But her eyes, those pale green eyes, held something cold and satisfied. Brielle's wolf snarled. She knew. Somehow, she knew Vivian was behind this. The Luna moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her hand rising to her throat in a gesture of distress. How terrible. The poor woman. She was a guest in our home, under our protection. Vivian's gaze swept the hall, landing on Brielle with laser focus. Who could have done such a thing? The question hung in the air like a noose. Silas's jaw tightened. That is what we are going to find out. I want every wolf accounted for. I want to know where everyone was between midnight and dawn. I want my king. Another guard approached, this one holding something in his hands. Something that made Silas go very still. It was a piece of cloth. Torn. Stained with blood. We found this clutched in the keeper's hand. She must have grabbed it from her attacker during the struggle. The guard held it up for Silas to see. It was silver. Not gray. Not white. True silver that seemed to catch the light and hold it. The exact shade of Brielle's wolf. Ice flooded Brielle's veins. No, this was not possible. She had been with Torin all night. Had not left his side except to sleep in the adjoining chamber. She had not. How interesting. Vivian's voice cut through the silence like a blade. That particular shade is quite distinctive, is it not? Every eye in the hall turned to Brielle. She felt the weight of their stares. Felt the suspicion taking root. She could practically hear the thoughts forming. The keeper had revealed Brielle's identity. Had proclaimed her the Silver-born. Had given her power and status she had not earned. And now the keeper was dead. And evidence pointed directly to a silver wolf. This is a setup, Brielle said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her insides. I was with Torin all night. I never left his chambers. I did not. The boy was asleep, Vivian interrupted gently. You said so yourself. How would he know if you slipped out? I did not. And you're a silver wolf. Powerful. Fast. You could have gone to the temple, killed the keeper, and returned before anyone noticed. The Luna's expression was sympathetic, understanding. Poisonous. I am not saying you did. I am simply pointing out that you had opportunity. But no motive, Silas's voice cracked like a whip. Why would Brielle kill someone who proclaimed her importance? Who gave her status and recognition? Vivian tilted her head, as if considering. Perhaps she was afraid. The keeper knew things about her. About her past. About her power. What if the old woman knew something dangerous? Something that threatened to expose Brielle as less than she appeared. The insinuation was subtle but clear. What if Brielle had been lying about the prophecy? What if she had somehow manipulated the keeper into proclaiming her the Silver-born? And then killed the old woman to silence her before the truth came out? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Uncertain. Troubled. Brielle felt the pack's trust wavering. Felt them looking at her with new eyes. She was powerful. Unknown. She had appeared out of nowhere and inserted herself into their Alpha's family. She had shifted into a form that legends were built on. Maybe she was dangerous after all. I did not kill her. Brielle's voice was louder now, projecting to the entire hall. I have no reason to harm the keeper. She was trying to help me. Trying to elevate you, Vivian finished. To give you power and influence you could never have earned on your own. Some might see that as a threat. Might worry that the keeper expected something in return. Payment for her services. The implication was clear. Vivian was painting Brielle as someone who used people and discarded them when they became inconvenient. Silas moved to stand between Vivian and Brielle, his expression thunderous. That is enough. You are accusing her without evidence. Without. I am merely asking questions, my mate. As Luna, it is my duty to protect this pack. And if there is even a possibility that this woman is dangerous. Vivian's expression was perfect, concerned innocence. Should we not investigate thoroughly before dismissing the evidence? She was good. Devastatingly good. Every word was reasonable, measured, designed to sound like concern for the pack rather than a personal vendetta. And it was working. Brielle could see it in the faces around her. Could feel the pack's mood shifting. They wanted to believe her. But the evidence was damning. And Vivian was their Luna. Chosen by the goddess herself. Why would she lie? There is more, another voice called out. One of the council members, an older wolf with gray in his beard and cunning in his eyes. The keeper's chamber has been searched. We found this. He held up a journal. Leather-bound. Worn. The keeper kept records of her visions, of prophecies and readings she performed for various packs. He opened the journal, flipping to a marked page. The entry from 3 days ago is troubling. Silas's expression darkened. Read it. The councilman cleared his throat. I have proclaimed the Silver Wolf as the one named in prophecy, but I fear I may have been deceived. Her power is real, but there is darkness in her that she hides well. I sense great violence in her past, blood on her hands that has never been washed clean. I must investigate further. Must determine if I have made a terrible mistake in elevating her. No. The word screamed through Brielle's mind. That was not real. The keeper would not have written that. She had been certain. Had said Brielle was chosen. This was fabricated. Planted. But she could not prove it. Vivian's voice dripped with false sympathy. How terrible. The poor woman discovered something dark about you and paid for it with her life. She turned to address the pack. We cannot allow someone so dangerous to remain near our future alpha. To remain free in our territory. You did this. Brielle's voice was raw with fury. You killed her. You planted that cloth and that journal entry. You are trying to frame me to remove me from Torrhen's side. Vivian's expression never wavered. I was in my chambers all night. I have witnesses who can confirm it. My ladies were with me until well past midnight. Unlike you, my whereabouts can be accounted for. Of course she had an alibi. Of course she had planned this perfectly. Brielle looked at Silas, silently begging him to see the truth. To trust her over the evidence. But the Alpha's face was a mask of conflicted emotion. He wanted to believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But he was also a king. A leader who could not ignore evidence. Who could not show favoritism without fracturing his authority. And Vivian knew it. The Luna pressed her advantage, her voice ringing with righteous authority. I call for this woman to be detained. Held until a full investigation can be conducted. For the safety of the pack. For the protection of our future king. Her pale eyes found Brielle's. Unless, of course, she has something to hide. Brielle's wolf surged forward, snarling. She could fight. Could shift and run. Could escape this trap and prove herself guilty in the eyes of the entire pack. Vivian had planned this perfectly. If Brielle ran, she looked guilty. If she stayed and was imprisoned, Vivian had time to plant more evidence. To twist more truths. To turn the pack completely against her. Either way, Brielle would be separated from Torrhen. And without her protection, the boy was vulnerable again. Brielle's gaze swept the hall, looking for allies. For anyone who might speak up for her. But the wolves who met her eyes looked away, uncertain, unwilling to challenge their Luna without proof. The only one who held her gaze was Silas. And in his silver eyes, she saw the war raging. The alpha who needed evidence before acting. The man who wanted to trust her. The father who could not risk his son's safety on faith alone. He was going to choose his pack. His duty. He was going to let them take her. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Brielle had known it was coming. Had known Silas was bound by laws and politics and the weight of leadership. But some stupid, hopeful part of her had believed he might choose differently. Might choose her. Take her to the holding chambers. Silas's voice was hollow. Dead. Under guard. No one enters without my express permission. The words felt like a death sentence. Guards moved toward Brielle. She could have fought them. Could have shifted and torn through them like paper. Her silver wolf was stronger, faster than any ordinary pack wolf. But that would only confirm every suspicion Vivian had planted. So Brielle stood still. Let them bind her wrists with silver chains that burned against her skin. Let them lead her through the crowd of wolves who looked at her with fear and suspicion. As she passed Vivian, the Luna leaned in close. Close enough that only Brielle could hear her whispered words. You should have stayed invisible, little maid. Should have remembered your place. Now you will watch from a cell while I finish what I started with that pathetic boy. And there is nothing you can do to stop me. Rage exploded through Brielle's veins. Her wolf howled, demanding to be released. demanding blood and vengeance and the satisfaction of ripping that beautiful face off the monster who wore it. The chains around her wrists began to glow, not with heat from the silver burning her skin, with light, with power that Brielle had kept locked away for 8 years. Power that was done hiding, done being quiet, done being afraid. The temperature in the hall dropped. Frost spread across the stone floor in delicate patterns. The torches along the walls flickered and dimmed. And Brielle's eyes, ordinary brown just moments before, blazed with silver light. Every wolf in the hall felt it. The surge of power that came from something ancient and primal and absolutely done being controlled. Vivian's eyes widened. Just slightly. Just enough for Brielle to see the flash of fear beneath the perfect composure. Good. When Brielle spoke, her voice echoed with harmonics that should not exist in a human throat. With the weight of something older than pack law. Older than politics. Older than lies. You want to see what the Silverborn can do when she stops hiding? Keep pushing. Keep threatening that child. Keep thinking you can destroy everyone who stands between you and power. The light in her eyes intensified. And I will show you exactly why my birth pack was afraid to keep me. The chains around her wrists shattered. Not melted. Shattered. Exploding outward in fragments of metal and light that hung suspended in the air for one impossible moment before clattering to the stone floor. The guards stumbled backward. The crowd pressed against the walls, instinct overriding courage. Even Silas had gone absolutely still, his expression stunned. Brielle stood in the center of the hall, power radiating from her like heat from a forge. Every ounce of submission and fear and careful invisibility burned away. She looked at Vivian, held her gaze. Let the Luna see exactly what she was facing. I did not kill the Keeper. But if you hurt Torin again, if you even look at him wrong, I will show you what real violence looks like. And no prophecy, no law, no bond will stop me from tearing you apart. Then, before anyone could react, before the guards could try to restrain her again, before Silas could give orders that would force him to choose between his mate and the woman who had just threatened her, Brielle shifted. The transformation was instantaneous, explosive. She did not ease into her wolf form like normal shifters. She erupted into it. Silver light filled the hall, blinding and absolute. And when it cleared, the Silverborn stood where Brielle had been. Massive. Powerful. Her coat burning with that impossible luminous silver. Her eyes blazing with light and fury and the promise of violence if her warning went unheeded. She looked at Silas one last time. Let him see the heartbreak and betrayal and desperate hope that maybe, somehow, he would still choose to believe her. Then she turned and ran. Not fleeing. Not hiding. Running toward the one thing that mattered more than her freedom. Toward Torin's chambers. Toward the child who would be vulnerable the moment Brielle was gone. Guards shouted. Tried to block her path. She was past them before they could fully react. A blur of silver light and primal speed. She burst through the door to Torin's chamber to find him awake, sitting up in bed with wide, terrified eyes. Brielle? She shifted back, her transformation so fast it should have been impossible. She was across the room in 3 strides, pulling him into her arms. Listen to me, little wolf. I have to leave. They think I did something terrible, and I cannot stay and fight without putting you in more danger. No. Torin's hands fisted in her shirt. You promised. You promised you would not leave. The words shattered her. But Brielle forced herself to meet his eyes, to make him understand. I am not leaving you. I am protecting you. There is a difference. She pressed a kiss to his forehead. Your father will keep you safe. He knows the truth now. Knows what she is. He will not let her hurt you again. But what if? No what ifs. Trust your father. Trust that he loves you more than anything. Trust that he will fight for you. She pulled back, framing his small face with her hands. And trust that I will come back. When the lies are exposed. When the truth comes to light. I will come back for you. I swear it on my life. Footsteps thundered in the corridor. They were coming. Brielle stood, moved to the window. It was 3 stories up, but her wolf could handle the jump. Brielle. She looked back at Torin one last time, memorized his face, burned it into her memory beside the faces of everyone else she had loved and lost. Be brave, little wolf. Be strong. Be the king you were meant to be. Then she dove through the window. Glass shattered around her. She twisted midair, shifting before she hit the ground, landing on 4 silver paws without breaking stride. Behind her, she heard Silas's roar, heard him calling her name. But she did not look back, could not look back, because if she did, if she saw his face, she would not have the strength to keep running. The Silver-born raced across the castle grounds, through the gates, into the forest beyond, running from the pack that had condemned her, running from the Alpha who had chosen duty over trust, running from the prophecy that had promised her purpose and delivered only pain. But as she ran, one thought burned bright and absolute in her mind. Vivian thought she had won. Thought removing Brielle had cleared her path to destroying Torin. She was wrong. Because the Silver-born was not fleeing. She was hunting. And when she returned, and she would return, Vivian would learn what it meant to threaten something Brielle loved. Would learn what prophecy really meant. Would learn exactly why silver wolves were feared. The forest swallowed her, and Brielle disappeared into the trees like moonlight fading at dawn. But her story was far from over. It was only just beginning. 3 days passed like years. 3 days where Torin barely spoke, barely ate, moved through the fortress like a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. The bruises on his face faded to yellow-green shadows, but the ones inside him, the ones Brielle had started to heal, those opened fresh and bleeding. His father tried. Silas sat with him at meals, spoke to him in that careful, gentle voice that sounded wrong coming from a wolf who had conquered territories with violence and blood. Asked him questions that went unanswered. Offered comfort that Torin did not know how to accept anymore. Because the one person who had made him feel safe was gone. And the one person who had hurt him was still here, still smiling, still wearing the crown and playing the role of grieving Luna who had lost a trusted servant to violence and madness. Vivian was winning. And everyone knew it. The pack whispered in corridors. Debated in council chambers. The keeper was dead, murdered in ways that spoke of power and rage. The silver chains around Brielle's wrists had shattered like glass. She had threatened the Luna in front of witnesses. Had shifted into something that looked more like legend than wolf. Had run instead of staying to prove her innocence. The evidence was damning. But Silas could not silence the doubt that clawed at his chest. He stood in his study on the 3rd night, staring at reports he was not reading, trying to understand how he had missed it. How his mate, his fated, moon-blessed mate, could have tortured his son for months while he hunted border threats and negotiated territory disputes and played the role of king. How a nameless maid had seen what he had been too blind to notice. The door opened without warning. Vivian entered, graceful and serene, carrying a tray with wine and the kind of practiced concern that made his wolf snarl in his chest. "My king, you have not slept. You barely eat. This guilt you carry is unnecessary." She set the tray down, moved closer. That woman was dangerous. Unstable. The keeper's death proves it. You did what you had to do. Silas did not look at her. Torin will not speak to me. He is in shock. Traumatized by what that creature did. Give him time. He fears you. The words came out flat. Emotionless. But Vivian went very still. That is ridiculous. I have only ever tried to mother him. To give him structure and discipline. To prepare him for the weight of the crown he will someday carry. Silas finally turned to face her. Studied her beautiful face, her perfect composure, the bond that thrummed faintly between them, weaker now, strained in ways he did not fully understand. "Show me your hands." Vivian blinked. Smiled that patient, indulgent smile. "What?" "Your hands. Show me." She extended them slowly, graceful and unblemished. No marks. No bruises. Nothing that suggested violence. But Silas was not looking at her hands. He was watching her eyes. And there, just for a fraction of a second, he saw it. The calculation. The assessment of whether he suspected, how much he knew, what she could safely say. That flicker of fear dressed in silk. His wolf surged forward, and Silas suddenly understood with brutal clarity what Brielle had been trying to tell him. What the maid had risked her life to reveal. The worst monsters do not look like monsters. They look like mates. Like family. Like the person fate swore you could trust. Get out. Vivian's smile faltered. My king. Get out. His voice did not rise. But the alpha dominance behind it, the weight of absolute command, made her take a step back. The bond between them flickered, straining under the pressure of his rage. She left. Quickly. Quietly. The door closed behind her like a coffin ceiling. Silas stood alone in his study, and for the first time since he had taken the throne, he did something no alpha was supposed to do. He doubted fate itself. The attack came at dawn. Not on the fortress. On the ritual grounds where the keeper had been killed. Where Brielle's scent still lingered in accusation. Silas received the report from a breathless scout who had run through the night to deliver it. Wolves had been found at the sacred site. Not pack. Not rogues. Something else. Something old and wrong and twisted. Shadow beasts. Creatures that should not exist outside of legend. Born from dark magic and corruption, they were mindless and vicious and utterly impossible to reason with. And they were hunting. Silas mobilized his warriors within minutes. Led them through the forest at a speed that left lesser wolves gasping. The sun was just breaking over the horizon when they reached the ritual grounds. And found carnage. Shadow beasts, 6 of them, massive and writhing with darkness that seemed to bleed off their bodies like smoke, surrounded a group of pack members who had been performing dawn blessings. The wolves were injured, bleeding, trying desperately to defend themselves against creatures that moved like liquid shadow. Silas shifted mid-stride, his transformation explosive and violent. His alpha wolf, huge and dark and radiating dominance, crashed into the nearest beast with enough force to shatter bone. The battle was chaos. Tooth and claw and darkness that resisted normal attacks. Shadow beasts did not die easily. Did not bleed. Did not fear. They simply consumed. Silas fought with the brutal efficiency of a king who had never lost a challenge. Tore through one beast. Then another. But there were too many. His warriors were being overwhelmed. The injured pack members would not survive much longer. And then, silver light exploded across the ritual grounds. Brielle crashed into the clearing like a comet made flesh. Her wolf form blazed with that impossible luminous silver, so bright it hurt to look at directly. She moved with speed that should not be possible, hitting the largest shadow beast with enough force to send it tumbling across the clearing. Where her claws connected, the darkness burned away like paper in flame. The shadow beast shrieked a sound that made every wolf present flatten their ears in pain. But they turned toward Brielle like iron drawn to a magnet. Like they recognized her. Like she was what they had been hunting all along. Silas froze, his jaws still locked around the throat of the beast he had killed, watching as Brielle faced down 4 shadow creatures that should have torn her apart in seconds. But she did not fall. She fought like something ancient and unstoppable. Like prophecy given teeth and fury. Her silver light intensified with every attack, burning away darkness, turning shadow into ash. And when the last beast lunged for her throat, she did not dodge. She met it head-on. Her jaws closed around its neck, and silver fire erupted from her mouth, from her eyes, from every inch of her body. The beast disintegrated, turned to smoke and dust and nothing. The clearing went silent. Brielle stood in the center of the carnage, her silver coat blazing in the dawn light, breathing hard. Blood, both hers and the beast's, stained her fur. She was injured, exhausted, but alive, and utterly, devastatingly powerful. Every wolf present felt it. The weight of something older than their pack. Older than their territories. Older than the laws they lived by. This was not just a strong wolf. This was the Silverborn. The one the prophecy spoke of. the one who would either save them or destroy them. Brielle's eyes, blazing with silver light, found Silas across the clearing, held his gaze. And in that look, he saw everything she could not say aloud. I came back. Not for you. For him. Then she collapsed. Silas caught her before she hit the ground. His wolf surged forward, shifting him back to human form even as he cradled her against his chest. Her transformation reversed, leaving Brielle, human, bleeding, unconscious, in his arms. My king, one of his warriors, started forward. Do not touch her. The command was absolute. Final. Silas looked down at the woman who had defied him, who had run from his judgment, who had just saved his pack from creatures that should not exist, who had shattered chains with her bare power, who had threatened his mate for hurting his son, who had looked at him with heartbreak and fury and desperate hope before she ran. And he realized with devastating clarity that he had made the worst mistake of his life. He had chosen the bond over the truth, had chosen duty over instinct, had chosen the woman fate gave him over the woman who had proven again and again that love was not about destiny. It was about choice. Bring healers, he ordered. Bring the council. Bring everyone. His voice dropped to something dangerous, something that made even his warriors take a step back. And bring me Vivian. Because Brielle had not killed the keeper, but someone had. Someone with access to the ritual grounds. Someone with motive to frame the Silverborn. Someone who needed Brielle gone before the truth could be revealed. Shadow beasts were not natural. They were summoned. Created through blood magic and dark rituals that required sacrifice. The Keeper's sacrifice. Silas carried Brielle through the forest, his pack following in stunned silence. His mind raced through every conversation, every moment, every careful lie Vivian had told. The pieces fell into place like bones breaking. She had known Brielle was protecting Torin. Had known the Maid was getting too close, seeing too much. So she had murdered the Keeper, the one wolf who might have been able to confirm that shadow magic had been used in the fortress. Had framed Brielle. Had turned the entire pack against her. Had ensured that when the Silverborn inevitably returned, she would be killed on sight. But Vivian had not counted on one thing. That Brielle would come back not to clear her name, but to save them anyway. That the Silverborn's power was not corruption. It was purification. And that Silas would finally see past the pretty mask to the monster wearing his mate's face. They reached the fortress gates as the sun fully crested the horizon. Wolves lined the walls, staring in shock at the sight of their alpha king carrying the accused murderer in his arms. Carrying her gently, protectively, like she mattered. Silas did not slow, did not explain. He carried Brielle straight to his private chambers, the same chambers where Torin had knelt and bled in silence. He laid her on his own bed, called for healers, stood guard while they worked, his wolf pacing beneath his skin, snarling at anyone who looked at her wrong. The head healer, a gray-furred elder named Maris, examined Brielle with careful, experienced hands, cleaned her wounds, whispered blessings over her unconscious form. Then Maris looked up at Silas with ancient, knowing eyes. She is not corrupted, my king. Whatever darkness touched this land, it did not touch her. Her power is old, clean, the kind that burns away rot instead of spreading it. Silas's chest tightened. Can you prove it? I can. But the proof requires the council to witness. Requires the accused to stand trial. Maris's expression hardened. And requires whoever summoned those shadow beasts to be present. Because silver blood reacts to corruption. If she has been practicing dark magic, her wounds will fester and spread. But if she is innocent, they will heal clean. Maris nodded. Silas looked down at Brielle. At the woman who had risked everything for his son. Who had come back even though she knew she might die. Who had saved his pack even after they had condemned her. Call the council, he said quietly. Call everyone. We will have our trial. His eyes hardened. And we will have our truth. The council chamber had never felt smaller. Every wolf of rank stood along the curved stone walls. Warriors who had fought beside Silas for decades. Elders who remembered when the northern territories were divided and bleeding. Nobles who had bent the knee when he united the packs under one banner. And in the center of it all, two women. Brielle stood on one side, still pale from blood loss, still trembling from exhaustion. Her wrists bore the silver burns from the chains that had shattered. Her clothes were torn and stained. She looked like exactly what she was, a maid who had dared to defy a queen. But her eyes, those ordinary brown eyes that had blazed with silver fire, held steady. Unafraid. Vivian stood opposite her, dressed in silk the color of fresh snow. Her hair was arranged in elaborate braids. Her hands were folded gracefully. She looked every inch the Luna. The blessed maid. The perfect queen. And she was smiling. Not the cruel smile she wore in private. The public one. The one that made wolves want to die for her. Between them, on a stone altar that had witnessed 1,000 judgments, lay the body of the keeper. Still preserved by magic. Still bearing the wounds that had killed him, deep gouges that spoke of claws and rage and violence. Silas stood at the head of the chamber, his face carved from stone. Torin sat beside him in a chair too large for his small body, silent and wide-eyed, watching everything with the intensity of a child who had learned that adults lied. Maris, the head healer, stepped forward. Her voice carried through the chamber with the weight of authority earned over 60 years of service. The law is clear. When dark magic is suspected, silver blood reveals truth. If Brielle of No House, the Silver-born, has practiced corruption, if she summoned the shadow beasts, if she murdered our keeper, her wounds will fester. Will spread. Will prove her guilt. She moved to Brielle, unwrapping the bandages on her arms where the shadow beasts had torn flesh. The crowd leaned forward, breath held. The wounds were clean. Not healed, Brielle had fought just hours ago, but clean. Pink and healthy and showing no sign of infection or rot. No darkness spread from them. No corruption bled into her skin. Maris examined each injury with methodical care. Then she looked at the council. At Silas. At Vivian. She is innocent. The words fell like stones into still water. Vivian's smile never wavered. Forgive me, Healer Maris, but shadow beasts are not the only mark of corruption. The keeper was killed with claws. Brielle possesses claws. She has admitted to threatening me in front of witnesses. She fled rather than face judgment. The evidence is incomplete. Silas's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. He stepped forward, and every wolf present felt the weight of his alpha dominance. Brielle threatened you because you were hurting my son. Vivian's expression flickered. Just slightly. My king, you're grieving. Confused. That woman has clearly manipulated. Show them your hands, Vivian. The Luna blinked. I do not understand. Your hands. Silas moved closer, his gaze locked on hers. You claim you never struck Torin. Never disciplined him with violence. So your hands should be unmarked. Show the council. For the first time, Vivian's composure cracked. Her smile tightened. Her eyes darted to the exits, calculating distances, assessing threats. This is absurd. I am your fated mate. The Luna of this pack. I will not be interrogated like some common. Show them. The command hit like a physical force. Vivian stumbled back a step, her wolf submitting before her mind could stop it. She extended her hands. They were flawless. Unmarked. Perfect. Exactly as they had been 3 days ago in his study. But Silas was not looking at her hands anymore. He was looking at Torin. His son had gone rigid in his chair. His small hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles were white. His breathing had gone shallow and quick. And his eyes, those silver eyes so much like Silas's own, were fixed on Vivian with the kind of terror that came from months of learned helplessness. Silas's heart cracked open. Torin. He kept his voice gentle. So gentle it hurt. Do you remember what we talked about? About telling the truth even when it is hard. The boy nodded. Barely. Did Vivian hurt you? Silence. Thick and suffocating. Torin's gaze flickered to Vivian. To Brielle. back to his father. And Silas saw the war happening behind those young eyes. The fear of speaking. The fear of staying silent. The terrible choice no child should ever have to make. Brielle moved. Not toward Torin. Not toward Vivian. She simply knelt. Right there in the center of the council chamber, lowering herself to the boy's eye level even though it put her at a disadvantage. Even though it made her vulnerable. "Little wolf," she said softly, and her voice carried that same warmth, that same safety she had offered him in the darkness of his room. "No one here will hurt you for telling the truth. Not anymore. I promise. You promised you would come back." Torin's voice broke. "You promised and then you left, and she said you were never coming back. That you were evil. That if I missed you, it meant I was evil too." The chamber erupted in whispers. Shocked. Horrified. Silas felt something inside him snap. He turned to Vivian, and what she saw in his face made her take 3 steps backward. Made her wolf whimper and press low. Made every instinct scream that she was facing a predator who had finally decided to stop pretending to be civilized. "You told my son he was evil for missing someone who showed him kindness. I was teaching him strength. You were breaking him." Silas's voice dropped to something lower than a growl. Something that made the stones themselves seem to hold their breath. "You were systematically destroying my child because you could not stand that he had something you never would. You could not stand that I loved him more than I could ever love you." Vivian's mask shattered. Not slowly. Not gracefully. It shattered like glass under a hammer, and what emerged was raw and ugly and real. "He is not even your real son." The words exploded from her, vicious and desperate. His mother was a weak, pathetic Omega who died giving birth to him. He should have died with her. But you kept him. Raised him. Loved him like he mattered. Her voice climbed higher, hysteria bleeding through. "And for what? So he could stand between us? So everyone could whisper that the Luna was second to a child." The chamber went silent. Even the torches seemed to stop flickering. Vivian realized what she had said. Tried to backpedal. "I did not mean, I only meant that he needed discipline. Structure. That soft-hearted maid was undermining. You killed the keeper." Brielle's voice cut through the excuses like a silver blade. She stood now, her exhaustion replaced by something harder. Something that made her look less like a maid and more like the prophecy everyone feared. "You summoned shadow beasts using his blood. Used dark magic to frame me because you knew I had seen too much. Knew I would tell Silas what you were doing to Torin. You have no proof. I have your confession." Silas's words fell like an execution sentence. "You just admitted to hating my son. To wanting him gone. To seeing him as an obstacle rather than a child under your protection." He took another step forward. "And I have the testimony of my own eyes. I saw the bruises, Vivian. Saw the fear. Smelled it on him for months and told myself it was growing pains. Told myself you would never." His voice broke. "But you did. You hurt him. Again and again. And you enjoyed it." Vivian's composure crumbled completely. Her beautiful face twisted with rage and desperation. "So what? So what if I disciplined him? He is a child. A weak, pathetic child who cried for his dead mother and flinched at shadows. I was making him strong. Making him worthy of being your heir. He was already worthy." Silas's voice was deadly quiet now. He was 6 years old and surviving abuse from the one person who should have protected him. That takes more strength than you will ever possess. He turned to Maris. "Test her. The same test you performed on Brielle. If Vivian has been practicing dark magic, her blood will show it." Vivian's eyes went wide. "You cannot be serious. I am your fated mate. The bond means nothing." Silas's words were final. Absolute. "Not compared to my son." Maris moved toward Vivian. The Luna tried to run. She made it 3 steps before Silas's dominance slammed into her like a physical wall. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, her wolf forced into submission by the sheer weight of alpha command. Maris cut Vivian's palm with a silver blade. Let 3 drops of blood fall onto a white cloth. The blood spread. Black. Thick. Wrong. Where it touched the fabric, the cloth rotted, dissolved. The stench of corruption filled the chamber, sulfur and decay, and something ancient and evil. Every wolf present recoiled. Vivian was guilty. Not just of abuse. Not just of cruelty. Of dark magic. Of murder. Of crimes that warranted death 100 times over. Silas looked at the woman he had been bound to. The woman fate had promised would complete him. And he felt nothing but disgust. You are hereby stripped of your title as Luna. Your bond to this pack is severed. Your crimes warrant execution. No. Vivian's voice cracked with desperation. Please. Please, I can change. I can be better. The bond, Silas, you cannot just. I already did. The words hung in the air. Vivian stared at him, uncomprehending. What? 3 days ago, standing in Torrens' chamber, watching him flinch from you, I severed it. The bond is gone. Has been gone. You just did not notice, because you never actually felt it in the first place. The truth of it crashed over her. The bond that should have been agony to break had simply ended. Because she had never valued it. Had never fed it with love or trust or any of the things that made bonds strong. She had treated it like a crown. A title. A tool. And Silas had taken it away like removing a piece of jewelry. Take her to the cells, he ordered. She will stand trial for murder. For practicing dark magic. For crimes against a child under pack protection. His eyes went cold. And if the council finds her guilty, and they will, she will be executed at dawn. Guards moved forward. Vivian fought them, screaming threats and curses and promises of vengeance. But she was powerless now. Just a wolf who had lost everything because she had chosen cruelty over love. They dragged her from the chamber. Silence fell. Silas turned to Brielle. She stood in the center of the council chamber, still pale, still exhausted, watching him with those eyes that held too much pain and too much hope. I am sorry. The words felt inadequate. Hollow. But they were all he had. I should have believed you. Should have seen what was happening. Should have protected my son instead of my pride. He took a step toward her. You saved him. Saved all of us. And I condemned you for it. Brielle's expression softened. Just slightly. You were bound to her. Blinded by fate. That is not your fault. It is my fault that I chose the bond over the truth. That I let duty convince me to ignore my instincts. Another step closer. You risked everything for Torren. Came back even though you knew we might kill you. Why? The answer came simple and devastating. Because he needed someone to come back. The chamber went still. Because everyone present understood what she meant. Understood that Torren had spent months learning that no one would save him. That pain was something you survived alone. That hope was a luxury he could not afford. And Brielle had decided that one child learning that lesson was one too many. Silas looked at this woman, this maid with no rank, no title, no pack, who had proven to be stronger than his fated mate. Braver than his warriors. More loyal than wolves who had sworn oaths in blood. You are pardoned. Fully and without condition. And you are welcome to stay in this pack. To take a position of honor. 2. I did not come back for honor. Brielle's voice was quiet but firm. I came back for him. She looked past Silas. To where Torren sat, silent and wide-eyed, watching everything with the careful attention of a child who had learned that adults' words and actions did not always match. Brielle crossed the chamber. Knelt before him. Met his eyes at his level. I told you I would come back, little wolf. I always keep my promises. Torren stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out one small hand and placed it in hers. You are not evil, he whispered. She lied about that too. Brielle's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. So are you, Torren. You are not weak. Not pathetic. Not anything, she said. You are strong and brave and so loved. The boy's composure finally broke. He collapsed into her arms, sobbing in the way children do when they have been holding back for too long. When the dam finally breaks and everything comes flooding out. Brielle held him. Rocked him. whispered soft reassurances while he cried out months of pain and fear and terrible loneliness. And Silas, the Alpha Wolf King who had conquered territories and broken armies, stood watching the woman he had condemned save the son he had failed to protect. Watching her give Torin what he needed most. Proof that sometimes, when you are drowning, someone really does come back. The fortress was quiet that night. Vivian was in the cells awaiting trial. The council had disbanded. The pack had returned to their homes, carrying whispers and shock and the knowledge that their perfect Luna had been a monster wearing a crown. In Torin's chamber, Brielle sat on the edge of his bed while he slept. Really slept. Not the terrified half-consciousness he had survived on for months, but deep, genuine rest. Silas stood in the doorway, watching. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For coming back. For saving him. For being what I should have been." Brielle looked up at him. "You were there when it mattered. You severed the bond. Chose him over fate. That took more courage than anything I did. I almost chose wrong. But you did not." She stood, moving toward the door, toward him. "You listened. You saw. And you acted. That is what makes you a good father, Silas. Not perfection. Just showing up." They stood in the doorway, close enough to feel each other's warmth, separated by everything that had happened and everything that could never be undone. "What happens now?" Silas asked. Brielle smiled. Small. Sad. Real. Now? Now I stay until Torin does not flinch anymore. Until he believes he is safe. Until he knows, bone deep, that the people who love him will fight for him. And after that? She looked past him. To the window where moonlight spilled across the floor. To the forest beyond. To the world that had cast her out and called her dangerous and feared her for being different. After that, I do not know. The Silverborn is still prophecy. Still something wolves fear. I cannot stay hidden forever. Then do not hide. Silas's voice was firm. Stay. Not as a maid. As pack. As he paused, searching for the right words. As someone who matters. Someone we need. Brielle met his eyes. Held his gaze. And for a moment, something passed between them. Something neither of them was ready to name. Something that felt like recognition. Like potential. Like maybe someday, when the wounds were healed and the trust was rebuilt. Maybe. But not yet. Not today. I will stay, she said simply. For now. For him. Silas nodded. Accepted it. Knew it was more than he deserved. That is enough. Brielle slipped past him, heading down the corridor toward the servants' quarters. But she paused. Looked back. Silas. Yes. Torin asked me something today. After the trial. He asked if you loved him more than the bond. Silas's chest tightened. What did you tell him? I told him to ask you himself. Because children should not have to wonder if they matter. Then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows like the silver wolf she was. Silas returned to Torin's chamber. Sat beside his sleeping son. Placed one large hand over the boy's small one. And he whispered the words into the darkness. I love you more than fate, Torin. More than destiny. More than anything the moon could give me or take away. In his sleep, Torin's fingers tightened around his father's hand. Just slightly. But enough. So here is the question that matters. If you were that child, if you had spent months learning that love was something you earned by becoming invisible, that safety was a lie, that the people fate said should protect you were the ones who hurt you most, would you have believed the rescue was real? Or would you have spent the rest of your life waiting for the other shoe to drop? And if you were standing in that council chamber, watching a woman confess to torturing a child, watching a king sever a fated bond to save his son, would you have called him weak for breaking what fate tied? Or would you have seen the truth, that some bonds should never have been made? That love is not about destiny or moon blessings or the perfect person handed to you by the universe. Love is about choosing. Every day. Every moment. Choosing to see. Choosing to act. Choosing to fight for the ones who cannot fight for themselves. Silas chose his son over fate. Brielle chose truth over safety. Torin chose to keep breathing, to keep hoping, even when hope felt like a luxury he could not afford. And what would you choose? Would you stay silent when you heard a child learning not to scream? Or would you step into the path of a king and whisper the words that should have killed you? Would you run when accused of crimes you did not commit? Or would you come back knowing they might kill you because one small boy needed to see that sometimes people really do keep their promises? These are not easy questions. They are not comfortable questions. But they are the questions that matter. Because monsters do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like mates. Like family. Like the person fate swore you could trust. And heroes do not always wear crowns. Sometimes they wear maids' uniforms and shattered silver chains, and the kind of courage that comes from deciding one child's pain is one too many. If this story lit something inside you, if it made you feel the weight of silence, the cost of speaking, the power of choosing love over destiny, then you need more. Because here at Cindy's Wolfheart Stories, we do not tell tales about perfect alphas and easy happy endings. We tell stories about the battles that happen in the spaces between words. About the courage it takes to break bonds that should never have been made. About children who survive by becoming invisible and the people who learn too late or just in time to see them. We tell stories about silver wolves and broken kings and the kind of love that chooses you even when fate does not. Stories that burn. Stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about heroes and villains and the thin line between them. Stories that remind you that the bravest thing you can do is whisper the truth when the whole world is screaming at you to stay silent. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because the next tale is already waiting in the shadows. And trust me, you will not want to face it alone. The Silverborn story is not over. Torin's healing has only just begun. And Silas is about to learn that choosing love over fate comes with consequences no prophecy prepared him for. The next chapter burns brighter than the last. Will you be there when it ignites?